Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The Valley of Fear, Part 2. The Scowrers. An audiobook narrated by David McCran. Chapter 1. The Man. It was the 4th of February in the year 1875. It had been a severe winter, and the snow lay deep in the gorges of the Gilmerton Mountains. The steam ploughs had, however, kept the railroad open, and the evening train which connects the long line of coal mining and iron-working settlements was slowly groaning its way up the steep gradients which led from Stagville on the plain to Vermissa, the central township which lies at the head of Vermissa Valley. From this point the track sweeps downward to Barton's Crossing, Helmdale, and the purely agricultural county of Merton. It was a single-track railroad, but at every siding, and they were numerous, long lines of trucks piled with coal and iron ore told of the hidden wealth which had brought a rude population and a bustling life to this most desolate corner of the United States of America. For desolate it was. Little could the first pioneer who had traversed it have ever imagined that the fairest prairies and the most lush water pastures were valueless compared to this gloomy land of black crag and tangled forest. Above the dark and often scarcely penetrable woods upon their flanks, the high bare crowns of the mountains, white snow, and jagged rock towered upon each flank, leaving a long, winding, tortuous valley in the centre. Up this the little train was slowly crawling. The oil lamps had just been lit in the leading passenger car, a long bare carriage in which some 20 or 30 people were seated. The greater number of these were workmen returning from their day's toil in the lower part of the valley. At least a dozen, by their grimed faces and safety lanterns which they carried, proclaimed themselves miners. These sat smoking in a group and conversed in low voices, glancing occasionally at two men on the opposite side of the car, whose uniforms and badges showed them to be policemen. Several women of the labouring class and one or two travellers who might have been small local storekeepers made up the rest of the company, with the exception of one young man in a corner by himself. It is with this man that we are concerned. Take a good look at him, for he is worth it. He is a fresh-complexioned, middle-sized young man, not far, one would guess, from his 30th year. He has large, shrewd, humorous grey eyes, which twinkle inquiringly from time to time as he looks round through his spectacles at the people about him. It is easy to see that he is of a sociable and possibly simple disposition, anxious to be friendly to all men. Anyone could pick him at once as gregarious in his habits and communicative in his nature, with a quick wit and a ready smile. And yet, the man who studied him more closely might discern a certain firmness of jaw and grim tightness about the lips, which would warn him that there were depths beyond, and that this pleasant, brown-haired young Irishman might conceivably leave his mark for good or evil upon any society to which he was introduced. Having made one or two tentative remarks to the nearest miner, and receiving only short, gruff replies, the traveller resigned himself to uncongenial silence, staring moodily out of the window at the fading landscape. It was not a cheering prospect. Through the growing gloom there pulsed the red glow of the furnaces on the sides of the hills. Great heaps of slag and dumps of cinders loomed up on each side, with the high shafts of the collieries towering above them. Huddled groups of mean wooden houses, the windows of which were beginning to outline themselves in light, were scattered here and there along the line, and the frequent halting places were crowded with their swarthy inhabitants. The iron and coal valleys of the Vermissa district were no resorts for the leisured or the cultured. Everywhere there were stern signs of the crudest battle of life, the rude work to be done, and the rude, strong workers who did it. The young traveller gazed out into this dismal country with a face of mingled repulsion and interest, which showed that the scene was new to him. At intervals he drew from his pocket a bulky letter to which he referred, and on the margins of which he scribbled some notes. Once, from the back of his waist, he produced something which one would hardly have expected to find in the possession of so mild-mannered a man. It was a navy revolver of the largest size. As he turned it slantways to the light, the glint upon the rims of the copper shells within the drum showed that it was fully loaded. He quickly restored it to his secret pocket, but not before it had been observed by a working man, who had seated himself upon the adjoining bench. "Hullo, mate," said he. "You seem heeled and ready." The young man smiled with an air of embarrassment. "Yes," said he, "we need them sometimes in the place I come from." "And where might that be?" "I'm last from Chicago." "A stranger in these parts?" "Yes." "You may find you need it here," said the workman. "Ah, is that so?" The young man seemed interested. "Have you heard nothing of the doings hereabouts?" "Nothing out of the way." "Why, I thought the country was full of it. You hear quick enough. What made you come here?" "I heard there was always work for a willing man." "Are you a member of the union?" "Sure." "Then you'll get your job, I guess. Have you any friends?" "Not yet, but I have the means of making them." "How's that, then?" "I am one of the eminent order of freemen. There's no town without a lodge, and where there is a lodge, I'll find my friends." The remark had a singular effect upon his companion. He glanced round suspiciously at the others in the car. The miners were still whispering among themselves. The two police officers were dozing. He came across, seated himself close to the young traveller, and held out his hand. "Put it there," he said. A hand grip passed between the two. "I see you speak the truth," said the workman, "but it's well to make certain." He raised his right hand to his right eyebrow. The traveller at once raised his left hand to his left eyebrow. "Dark nights are unpleasant," said the workman. "Yes, for strangers to travel," the other answered. "That's good enough. I'm Brother Scanlon, Lodge 341, Vermissa Valley. Glad to see you in these parts." "Thank you. I'm Brother John McMurdo, Lodge 29, Chicago. Bodymaster J.H. Scott. But I am in luck to meet a brother so early." "Well, there are plenty of us about. You won't find the order more flourishing anywhere in the States than right here in Vermissa Valley. But we could do with some lads like you. I can't understand a spry man of the Union finding no work to do in Chicago." "I found plenty of work to do," said McMurdo. "Then why'd you leave?" McMurdo nodded towards the policeman and smiled. "I guess those chaps would be glad to know," he said. Scanlon groaned sympathetically. In trouble?" he asked in a whisper. "Deep. A penitentiary job?" "And the rest." "Not a killing?" "It's early days to talk of such things," said McMurdo with the air of a man who had been surprised into saying more than he intended. "I've got my own good reasons for leaving Chicago, and let that be enough for you. Who are you that you should take it on yourself to ask such things?" His grey eyes gleamed with sudden and dangerous anger from behind his glasses. "All right, mate, no offence meant. The boys will think none of the worse of you, whatever you may have done. Where are you bound for now?" "Vermissa. That's the third halt down the line. Where are you staying?" McMurdo took out an envelope and held it close to the murky oil lamp. "Here is the address, Jacob Shafter, Sheridan Street. It's a boarding house that was recommended by a man I knew in Chicago. Well, I don't know it, but Vermissa is out of my beat. I live at Hobson's Patch, and that's here where we are drawing up. But say, there's one bit of advice I will give you before we depart. If you're in trouble in Vermissa, go straight to the Union House and see Boss McGinty. He is the bodymaster of Vermissa Lodge, and nothing can happen in these parts unless Black Jack McGinty wants it. So long, mate. Maybe we'll meet in the lodge one of these evenings. But mind my words, if you are in trouble, go to Boss McGinty." Scanlan descended, and McMurdo was left once again to his thoughts. Night had now fallen, and the flames of the frequent furnaces were roaring and leaping in the darkness. Against their lurid background, dark figures were bending and straining, twisting and turning, with the motion of winch or of windlass, to the rhythm of the eternal clank and roar. "I guess hell must look something like that," said a voice. McMurdo turned and saw one of the policemen had shifted in his seat and was staring out into the fiery waste. "For that matter," said the other policeman, "I allow that hell must be something like that. If there were worse devils down yonder than some we could name, it's more than I'd expect. I guess you are new to this part, young man." "Well, what if I am?" McMurdo answered in a surly voice. "Just this, mister, that I should advise you to be careful in choosing your friends. I don't think I'd begin with Mike Scanlan or his gang if I were you." "What the hell is it to you who are my friends?" roared McMurdo in a voice which brought every head in the carriage round to witness the altercation. "Did I ask for your advice, or did you think me such a sucker that I couldn't move without it? You speak when you're spoken to, and by the Lord you'll have to wait a long time, if it was me." He thrust out his face and grinned at the patrolman like a snarling dog. The two policemen, heavy, good-natured men, were taken aback by the extraordinary vehemence with which their friendly advances had been rejected. "No offence, stranger," said one. "It was a warning for your own good, seeing that you are, by your own showing, new to the place." "I'm new to the place, but I'm not new to you and your kind," cried McMurdo in cold fury. "I guess you're the same in all places, shoving your advice in when nobody asks for it." "Maybe we'll see more of you before very long," said one of the patrolmen with a grin. "You're a real hand-picked one, if I'm a judge." "I was thinking the same," remarked the other. "I guess we may meet again." "I'm not afraid of you, and don't you think it," cried McMurdo. "My name's Jack McMurdo, see? If you want me, you'll find me at Jacob Shafter's on Sheridan Street, Vermissa. So I'm not hiding from you, am I? Day or night I dare to look the like of you in the face. Don't make any mistake about that." There was a murmur of sympathy and admiration from the miners at the dauntless demeanour of the newcomer, while the two policemen shrugged their shoulders and renewed a conversation between themselves. A few minutes later, the train ran into the ill-lit station, and there was a general clearing, for Vermissa was by far the largest town on the line. McMurdo picked up his leather gripsack and was about to start off into the darkness when one of the miners accosted him. "By gar, mate, you know how to speak to the cops," he said in a voice of awe. "It was grand to hear you. Let me carry your grip and show you the road. I'm passing Shafters on the way to my own shack." There was a chorus of friendly good nights from the other miners as they passed from the platform. Before ever he had set a foot in it, McMurdo the Turbulent had become a character in Vermissa. The country had been a place of terror, but the town was in its way even more depressing. Down that long valley there was at least a certain gloomy grandeur in the huge fires and the clouds of drifting smoke, while the strength and industry of man found fitting monuments in the hills which he had spilled by the side of his monstrous excavations. But the town showed a dead level of mean ugliness and squalor. The broad street was churned up by the traffic into horrible rutted pastes of muddy snow. The sidewalks were narrow and uneven. The numerous gas lamps served only to show more clearly a long line of wooden houses, each with its veranda facing the street, unkempt and dirty. As they approached the centre of the town, the scene was brightened by a row of well-lit stores, and even more by a cluster of saloons and gaming houses in which the miners spent their hard-earned but generous wages. "That's the Union House," said the guide, pointing to one saloon which rose almost to the dignity of being a hotel. "Jack McGinty is the boss there." "What sort of man is he?" McMurdo asked. "What? Have you never heard of the boss?" "How could I have heard of him, when you know that I am a stranger in these parts?" "Well, I thought his name was known clear across the country. It's been in the papers often enough." "What for?" "Well," the miner lowered his voice, "over the affairs." "What affairs?" "Good Lord, mister, you are queer, if I must say it without offence. There's only one set of affairs that you'll hear of in these parts, and that's the affairs of the Scowrers." "Why, I have seemed to read of the Scowrers in Chicago. A gang of murderers, are they not?" "Hush, on your life!" cried the miner, standing still in alarm, and gazing in amazement at his companion. "Man, you won't live long in these parts if you speak in the open street like that. Many a man has had his life beaten out of him for less." "Well, I know nothing about them. It's only what I have read." "And I'm not saying that you have not read the truth." The man looked nervously round him as he spoke, peering into the shadows as if he feared to see some lurking danger. "If killing is murder, then God knows there is murder and to spare. But don't you dare breathe the name of Jack McGinty in connection with it, stranger, for every whisper goes back to him, and he is not one that is likely to let it pass. Now, that's the house you're after, the one standing back from the street. You'll find old Jacob Shafter that runs it, as honest a man as lives in this township." "I thank you," said McMurdo, and shaking hands with his new acquaintance, he plodded, gripsack in hand, up the path which led to the dwelling-house, at the door of which he gave a resounding knock. It was opened at once by someone very different from what he had expected. It was a woman, young and singularly beautiful. She was of the German type, blonde and fair-haired, with the piquant contrast of a pair of beautiful dark eyes, with which she surveyed the stranger with surprise and a pleasing embarrassment which brought a wave of colour over her pale face. Framed in the bright light of the open doorway, it seemed to McMurdo that he had never seen a more beautiful picture, the most attractive for its contrast with the sordid and gloomy surroundings. A lovely violet growing upon one of those black shag heaps of the mines would not have seemed more surprising. So entranced was he that he stood staring without a word, and it was she who broke the silence. "I thought it was father," said she, with a pleasing little touch of a German accent. "Did you come to see him? He is downtown. I expect him back every minute." McMurdo continued to gaze at her in open admiration until her eyes dropped in confusion before this masterful visitor. "No, miss," he said at last. "I am in no hurry to see him, but your house was recommended to me for board. I thought it might suit me, and now I know it will." "You are quick to make up your mind," said she with a smile. "Anyone but a blind man could do as much," the other answered. She laughed at the compliment. "Oh, come right in, sir," she said. "I am Miss Etty Shafter, Mr. Shafter's daughter. My mother's dead, and I run the house. You can sit down by the stove in the front room until Father comes along. Ah, here he is. So you can fix things with him right away." A heavy elderly man came plodding up the path. In a few words, McMurdo explained his business. A man of the name of Murphy had given him the address in Chicago. He, in turn, had had it from someone else. Old Shafter was quite ready. The stranger made no bones about terms, agreed at once to every condition, and was apparently fairly flush of money. For $7 a week, paid in advance, he was to have board and lodging. So it was that McMurdo, the self-confessed fugitive from justice, took up his abode under the roof of the Shafters, the first step which was to lead to so long and dark a train of events, ending in a far distant land. Part 2, Chapter 2. The Bodymaster. McMurdo was a man who made his mark quickly. Wherever he was, the folk around soon knew it. Within a week, he had become infinitely the most important person at Shafters. There were 10 or a dozen boarders there, but they were honest foremen or commonplace clerks from the stores, of a very different calibre from the young Irishman. Of an evening when they gathered together, his joke was always the readiest, his conversation the brightest, and his song the best. He was a born boon companion, with a magnetism which drew good humour from all around him. And yet he showed again and again, as he had shown in the railway carriage, a capacity for sudden fierce anger, which compelled the respect and even the fear of those who met him. For the law too, and all who were connected with it, he exhibited a bitter contempt, which delighted some and alarmed others of his fellow boarders. From the first he made it evident, by his open admiration, that the daughter of the house had won his heart from the instant that he had set eyes upon her beauty and her grace. He was no backward suitor. On the second day he told her that he loved her, and from then onward he repeated the same story with an absolute disregard of what she might say to discourage him. "Someone else," he would cry. "Well, the worse luck for someone else. Let him look out for himself. Am I to lose my life's chance and all my heart's desire for someone else? You can keep on saying no, Etty. The day will come when you will say yes, and I'm young enough to wait." He was a dangerous suitor, with his glib Irish tongue and his pretty coaxing ways. There was about him also that glamour of experience and of mystery which attracts a woman's interest, and finally her love. He could talk of the sweet valleys of County Monaghan, from which he came, of the lovely distant island, the low hills and green meadows, of which seemed the more beautiful when imagination viewed them from this place of grime and snow. Then he was versed in the life of the cities of the north, of Detroit, and the lumber camps of Michigan, and finally of Chicago, where he had worked in a planing mill. And afterwards came the hint of romance, the feeling that strange things had happened to him in that great city, so strange and so intimate that they might not be spoken of. He spoke wistfully of a sudden leaving, a breaking of old ties, a flight into a strange world, ending in this dreary valley, and Etty listened, her dark eyes gleaming with pity and with sympathy, those two qualities which may turn so rapidly and so naturally to love. McMurdo had obtained a temporary job as bookkeeper, for he was a well-educated man. This kept him out most of the day, and he had not found occasion yet to report himself to the head of the lodge of the Eminent Order of Freemen. He was reminded of his omission, however, by a visit one evening from Mike Scanlon, the fellow member who he had met in the train. Scanlon, the small, sharp-faced, nervous black-eyed man seemed glad to see him once more. After a glass or two of whisky, he broached the object of his visit. "Say, McMurdo," said he, "I remembered your address, so I made bold to call. I'm surprised that you're not reported to the bodymaster. Why haven't you seen Boss McGinty yet?" "Well, I had to find a job. I've been busy." "You must find time for him if you have none for anything else." "Good Lord, man, you're a fool not to have been down to the Union House and registered your name the first morning after you came here. If you run against him, well, you mustn't, that's all." McMurdo showed mild surprise. "I've been a member of the lodge for over 2 years, Scanlon, but I have never heard that duties were so pressing as all that." "Maybe not in Chicago." "Well, it's the same society here." "Is it?" Scanlon looked at him long and fixedly. There was something sinister in his eyes. "Isn't it?" "You tell me that in a month's time. I hear you had a talk with the patrolman after I left the train." "How did you know that?" "Oh, it got about. Things do get about for good and for bad in this district." "Well, yes. I told the hounds what I thought of them." "By the Lord, you'll be a man after McGinty's heart." "What, does he hate the police too?" Scanlon burst out laughing. "You go and see him, my lad," said he as he took his leave. "It's not the police but you that he'll hate if you don't. Now, take a friend's advice and go at once." It chanced that on the same evening McMurdo had another more pressing interview, which urged him in the same direction. It may have been that his attentions to Etty had been more evident than before, or that they had gradually obtruded themselves into the slow mind of his good German host. But whatever the cause, the boarding house-keeper beckoned the young man into his private room, and started on the subject without any circumlocution. "It seems to me, mister," said he, "that you are getting set on my Etty. Ain't that so, or am I wrong?" "Yes, that is so," the young man answered. "Well, I want to tell you right now that it ain't no manner of use. There's someone slipped in afore you." "She told me so." "Well, you can lay that she told you the truth. But did she tell you who it was?" "No, I asked her, but she wouldn't tell." "I dare say not, the little baggage. Perhaps she did not wish to frighten you away." "Frighten?" McMurdo was on fire in a moment. "Ah, yes, my friend. You need not be ashamed or to be frightened of him. It is Teddy Baldwin." "And who the devil is he?" "He is a boss of Scowrers." "Scowrers? I've heard them before. It's Scowrers here and Scowrers there, and always in a whisper. What are you all afraid of? Who are the Scowrers?" The boarding-house keeper instinctively sank his voice, as everyone did who talked about that terrible society. "The Scowrers," said he, "are the eminent order of freemen." The young man stared. "Why, I am a member of that order myself." "You? I would never have had you in my house if I'd known it, not if you were to pay me $100 a week." "What's wrong with the order? It's for charity and good fellowship. The rules say so." "Maybe in some places, not here." "What is it here?" "It's a murder society, that's what it is." McMurdo laughed incredulously. "How can you prove that?" he asked. "Prove it? Are there not 50 murders to prove it?" "What about Millman and Van Shorst, and the Nicholson family, and old Mr. Hyam, and little Billy James, and the others? Prove it? Is there a man or a woman in this valley that does not know it?" "See here," said McMurdo earnestly. "I want you to take back what you've said, or else make it good. One or the other you must do before I quit this room. Put yourself in my place. Here I am, a stranger in the town. I belong to a society that I know only as an innocent one. You'll find it through the length and breadth of the states, but always as an innocent one. Now, when I'm counting upon joining it here, you tell me that it is the same as a murder society called the Scowrers. I guess you owe me either an apology or else an explanation, Mr. Shafter. I can but tell you what the whole world knows, mister. The bosses of the one are the bosses of the other. If you offend the one, it is the other that will strike you. We have proved it too often. That's just gossip. I want proof, said McMurdo. If you live here long enough, you will get your proof. But I forget that you are yourself one of them. You will soon be as bad as the rest. But you will find other lodgings, mister. I cannot have you here. Is it not bad enough that one of these people come courting my Etty, and that I dare not turn him down, but that I should have another for my boarder? Yes, indeed, you shall not sleep here after tonight. McMurdo found himself under sentence of banishment both from his comfortable quarters and from the girl whom he loved. He found her alone in the sitting-room that same evening, and he poured his troubles into her ear. "Sure your father is after giving me notice," he said. "It's little I would care if it was just my room, but indeed, Etty, though it's only a week that I've known you, you are the very breath of life to me, and I can't live without you." "Oh, hush, Mr. McMurdo, don't speak so," said the girl. "I have told you, have I not, that you are too late? There is another, and if I have not promised to marry him at once, at least I can promise no one else." "Suppose I had been the first, Etty, would I have had a chance?" The girl sank her face into her hands. "I wish to heaven that you had been the first," she sobbed. McMurdo was down on his knees before her in an instant. "For God's sakes, Etty, let it stand at that," he cried. "Will you ruin your life and my own for the sake of this promise? Follow your heart, acushla. 'Tis a safer guide than any promise before you knew what it was you were saying." He had seized Etty's white hand between his own strong brown ones. "Say that you'll be mine, and we will face it out together." "Not here." "Yes, here." No, Jack." His arms were round her now. "It could not be here. Could you take me away?" A struggle passed for a moment over McMurdo's face, but it ended by setting like granite. "No, here," he said. "I'll hold you against the world, Etty, right here where we are." "Why should we not leave together?" "No, Etty, I can't leave here." "But why?" "I'd never hold my head up again if I felt that I had been driven out. Besides, what is there to be afraid of? Are we not free folks in a free country? If you love me, and I you, who will dare come between?" "You don't know, Jack. You've been here too short a time. You don't know this Baldwin. You don't know McGinty and his Scowrers." "No, I don't know them, and I don't fear them, and I don't believe in them," said McMurdo. "I've lived among rough men, my darling, and instead of fearing them, it has always ended that they have feared me. Always, Etty. It's mad on the face of it. If these men, as your father says, have done crime after crime in the valley, and if everyone knows them by name, how comes it that none are brought to justice? You answer me that, Etty." "Because no witness dares to appear against them. He would not live a month if he did. Also because they have always their own men to swear that the accused one was far from the scene of the crime. But surely, Jack, you must have read all this. I had understood that every paper in the United States was writing about it." "Well, I have read something, it is true, but I had thought it was a story. Maybe these men have some reason in what they do. Maybe they are wronged and have no other way to help themselves." "Oh, Jack, don't let me hear you speak so. That is how he speaks, the other one." "Baldwin? He speaks like that, does he?" "And that is why I loathe him so. Oh, Jack, now I can tell you the truth. I loathe him with all my heart, but I fear him also. I fear him for myself, but above all I fear him for my father. I know that some great sorrow would come upon us if I dared to say what I really felt. That is why I have put him off with half-promises. It was in real truth our only hope. But if you would fly with me, Jack, we could take father with us and live forever far from the power of these wicked men." Again there was a struggle upon McMurdo's face, and again it set like granite. "No harm should come to you, Etty, nor to your father either. As to wicked men, I expect you may find that I am as bad as the worst of them before we're through." "No, no, Jack, I would trust you anywhere." McMurdo laughed bitterly. "Good Lord, how little you know of me! Your innocent soul, my darling, could not even guess what is passing in mine. But hello, who's the visitor?" The door had opened suddenly, and a young fellow came swaggering in with the air of one who is the master. He was a handsome, dashing young man, of about the same age and build as McMurdo himself. Under his broad-brimmed black felt hat, which he had not troubled to remove, a handsome face with fierce domineering eyes and a curved hawk bill of a nose looked savagely at the pair who sat by the stove. Etty had jumped to her feet, full of confusion and alarm. "I'm glad to see you, Mr. Baldwin," said she. "You're earlier than I had thought. Come and sit down." Baldwin stood with his hands on his hips, looking at McMurdo. "Who is this?" he asked curtly. "It is a friend of mine, Mr. Baldwin, a new boarder here. Mr. McMurdo, may I introduce you to Mr. Baldwin?" The young men nodded in surly fashion to each other. "Maybe Miss Etty has told you how it is with us," said Baldwin. "I didn't understand that there was any relation between you." "Didn't you? Well, you can understand it now. You can take it from me that this young lady is mine, and you'll find it a very fine evening for a walk." "Thank you. I'm in no humor for a walk. Aren't you?" The man's savage eyes were blazing with anger. "Maybe you are in a humor for a fight, Mr. Boarder." "That I am," cried McMurdo, springing to his feet. "You never said a more welcome word." "For God's sake, Jack! Oh, for God's sake!" cried poor distracted Etty. "Oh, Jack, Jack, he will hurt you." "Oh, it's Jack, is it?" said Baldwin with an oath. "You've come to that already, have you?" "Oh, Ted, be reasonable, be kind, for my sake. Ted, if ever you loved me, be big-hearted and forgiving." "I think, Etty, that if you were to leave us alone, we could get this thing settled," said McMurdo quietly. "Or maybe, Mr. Baldwin, you will take a turn down the street with me. It's a fine evening, and there's some open ground beyond the next block." "I'll get even with you, without needing to dirty my hands," said his enemy. "You'll wish you had never set foot in this house before I'm through with you." "No time like the present," cried McMurdo. "I'll choose my own time, mister. You can leave the time to me. See here." He suddenly rolled up his sleeve and showed upon his forearm a peculiar sign which appeared to have been branded there. It was a circle with a triangle in it. "Do you know what that means?" "I neither know nor care." "Well, you will know, I'll promise you that. You won't be much older either. Perhaps Miss Etty can tell you something about it. As to you, Etty, you'll come back to me on your knees, d'you hear, girl? On your knees, and then I'll tell you what your punishment may be. You've sowed, and by the Lord, I'll see that you reap." He glanced at them both in fury. Then he turned upon his heel, and in an instant later the outer door had banged behind him. For a few moments McMurdo and the girl stood in silence. Then she threw her arms around him. "Oh, Jack, how brave you were! But it's no use, you must fly. Tonight, Jack, tonight, it's your only hope. He will have your life. I read it in his horrible eyes. What chance have you against a dozen of them, with Boss McGinty and all the power of the lodge behind them?" McMurdo disengaged her hands, kissed her, and gently pushed her back into a chair. There, Acushla, there. Don't be disturbed or fear for me. I am a free man myself. I'm after telling your father about it. Maybe I'm no better than the others, so don't make a saint of me. Perhaps you hate me too now that I've told you as much.
Hate you, Jack? While life lasts, I could never do that. I've heard that there is no harm in being a freeman anywhere but here, so why should I think the worse of you for that? But if you are a free man, Jack, why should you not go down and make a friend of Boss McGinty? Oh, hurry, Jack, hurry. Get your word in first, or the hounds will be on your trail.
I was thinking the same thing, said McMurdo. I'll go right now and fix it. You can tell your father that I'll sleep here tonight and find some other quarters in the morning. The bar of McGinty's saloon was crowded as usual, for it was the favourite loafing place of all the rougher elements of the town. The man was popular, for he had a rough, jovial disposition which formed a mask, covering a great deal which lay behind it. But apart from this popularity, the fear in which he was held throughout the township, and indeed down the whole 30 miles of the valley, and past the mountains on each side of it, was enough in itself to fill his bar, for none could afford to neglect his good will. Besides those secret powers which it was universally believed that he exercised in so pitiless a fashion, he was a high public official, a municipal councillor, and a commissioner of roads, elected to the office through the votes of the ruffians, who in turn expected to receive favours at his hands. Assessments and taxes were enormous. The public works were notoriously neglected. The accounts were slurred over by bribed auditors, and the decent citizen was terrorized into paying public blackmail and holding his tongue lest some worse thing befall him. Thus it was that, year by year, Boss McGinty's diamond pins became more obtrusive, his gold chains more weighty across a more gorgeous vest, and his saloon stretched farther and farther until it threatened to absorb one whole side of the market square. McMurdo pushed open the swinging door of the saloon and made his way amid the crowd of men within, through an atmosphere blurred with tobacco smoke and heavy with the smell of spirits. The place was brilliantly lighted, and the huge, heavily gilt mirrors upon every wall reflected and multiplied the garish illumination. There were several bartenders in their shirt sleeves, hard at work, mixing drinks for the loungers who fringed the broad brass-trimmed counter. At the far end, with his body resting upon the bar, and a cigar stuck at an acute angle from the corner of his mouth, stood a tall, strong, heavily built man who could be none other than the famous McGinty himself. He was a black-maned giant, bearded to the cheekbones, and with a shock of raven hair which fell to his collar. His complexion was as swarthy as that of an Italian, and his eyes were of a strange dead black, which, combined with a slight squint, gave them a particularly sinister appearance. All else in the man, his noble proportions, his fine features, and his frank bearing, fitted in with that jovial man-to-man manner which he affected. Here, one would say, is a bluff, honest fellow, whose heart would be sound however rude his outspoken words might seem. It was only when those dead dark eyes, deep and remorseless, were turned upon a man that he shrank within himself, feeling that he was face to face with an infinite possibility of latent evil, with a strength and courage and cunning behind it, which made it 1,000 times more deadly. Having had a good look at his man, McMurdo elbowed his way forward with his usual careless audacity, and pushed himself through the little group of courtiers who were fawning upon the powerful boss, laughing uproariously at the smallest of his jokes. The young stranger's bold grey eyes looked back fearlessly through their glasses at the deadly black ones which turned sharply upon him. Well, young man, I can't call your face to mind. I'm new here, Mr. McGinty. You are not so new that you can't give a gentleman his proper title. He's Counselor McGinty, young man, said a voice from the group. I'm sorry, Counselor. I'm strange to the ways of the place, but I was advised to see you. Well, you see me. This is all there is. What do you think of me? Well, it's early days. If your heart is as big as your body and your soul as fine as your face, then I'd ask for nothing better, said McMurdo. By gar, you've got an Irish tongue in your head anyhow, cried the saloon-keeper, not quite certain whether to humour this audacious visitor or to stand upon his dignity. So, you are good enough to pass my appearance? Sure, said McMurdo. And were you told to see me? I was. And who told you? Brother Scanlon, of Lodge 341 Vermissa. I drink your health, Counselor, and to our better acquaintance. He raised a glass with which he had been served to his lips, and elevated his little finger as he drank it. McGinty, who had been watching him narrowly, raised his thick black eyebrows. Oh, it's like that, is it? Said he. I'll have to look a bit closer into this, Mr. McMurdo. A bit closer, Mr. McMurdo, for we don't take folk on trust in these parts, nor believe all we're told neither. Come in here for a moment, behind the bar. There was a small room there, lined with barrels. McGinty carefully closed the door, and then seated himself on one of them, biting thoughtfully on his cigar, and surveying his companion with those disquieting eyes. For a couple of minutes he sat in complete silence. McMurdo bore the inspection cheerfully, one hand in his coat pocket, the other twisting his brown moustache. Suddenly McGinty stooped and produced a wicked-looking revolver. See here, my joker, said he. If I thought you were playing any game on us, it would be short work for you. This is a strange welcome, McMurdo answered with some dignity, for the bodymaster of a lodge of freemen to give a stranger brother. Aye, but it's just that same that you have to prove, said McGinty, and God help you if you fail. Where were you made? Lodge 29, Chicago. When? June 24, 1872. What bodymaster? James H. Scott. Who is your district ruler? Bartholomew Wilson. You seem glib enough in your tests. What are you doing here? Working, the same as you, but a poorer job. You have your back answer quick enough. Yes, I was always quick of speech. Are you quick of action? I've had that name among those who know me best. Well, we may try you sooner than you think. Have you heard anything of the lodge in these parts? I've heard that it takes a man to be a brother. True for you, Mr. McMurdo. Why did you leave Chicago? I'm damned if I tell you that. McGinty opened his eyes. He was not used to being answered in such fashion, and it amused him. Why won't you tell me? Because no brother may tell another a lie. Then the truth is too bad to tell. You can put it that way if you like. See here, mister. You can't expect me as bodymaster to pass into the lodge a man for whose past he can't answer. McMurdo looked puzzled. Then he took a worn newspaper cutting from an inner pocket. You wouldn't squeal on a fellow, said he. I'll wipe my hand across your face if you say such words to me, cried McGinty hotly. You are right, Counselor, said McMurdo meekly. I should apologize. I spoke without thought. Well, I know that I am safe in your hands. Look at that clipping. McGinty glanced his eyes over the account of the shooting of one Jonas Pinto in the Lake Saloon, Market Street, Chicago, in the New Year week of 1874. Your work? He asked, as he handed back the paper. McMurdo nodded. Why did you shoot him? I was helping Uncle Sam to make dollars. Maybe mine were not as good gold as his, but they looked as well and were cheaper to make. This man Pinto helped me to shove the queer— To do what? Well, it means to pass the dollars out into circulation. Then he said he would split. Maybe he did split. I didn't wait to see. I just killed him and lighted out for the coal country. Why the coal country? 'Cause I read in the papers that they weren't too particular in those parts. McGinty laughed. You were first a coiner and then a murderer, and you came to these parts because you thought you'd be welcome. That's about the size of it, McMurdo answered. Well, I guess you'll go far. Say, can you make those dollars yet? McMurdo took half a dozen from his pocket. Those never passed the Philadelphia Mint, said he. You don't say. McGinty held them to the light in his enormous hand, which was hairy as a gorilla's. I can see no difference. Gar, you'll be a mighty useful brother, I'm thinking. We can do with a bad man or two among us, friend McMurdo, for there are times when we have had to take our own part. We'd soon be against the wall if we didn't shove back at those that were pushing us. Well, I guess I'll do my share of shoving with the rest of the boys. You seem to have a good nerve. You didn't squirm when I shoved this gun at you. It was not me that was in danger. Who then? It was you, Counselor. McMurdo drew a cocked pistol from the side pocket of his pea-jacket. I was covering you all the time. I guess my shot would have been as quick as yours. By gar! McGinty flushed an angry red, and then burst into a roar of laughter. Say, we've had no such holy terror come to hand this many a year. I reckon the lodge will learn to be proud of you. Well, what the hell do you want? And can't I speak alone with a gentleman for 5 minutes, but you must butt in on us? The bartender stood abashed. I'm sorry, Counselor, but it's Ted Baldwin. He says he must see you this very minute. The message was unnecessary, for the set, cruel face of the man himself was looking over the servant's shoulder. He pushed the bartender out and closed the door on him. So, said he with a furious glance at McMurdo, you got here first, did you? I've a word to say to you, Counselor, about this man. And say it here and now before my face, cried McMurdo. I'll say it at my own time and in my own way. Tut, tut, said McGinty, getting off his barrel. Tut, tut, this will never do. We have a new brother here, Baldwin, and it's not for us to greet him in such a fashion. Hold out your hand, man, and make it up. Never, cried Baldwin in a fury. I've offered to fight him if he thinks I have wronged him, said McMurdo. I'll fight him with fists, or if that won't satisfy him, I'll fight him any other way he chooses. Now, I'll leave you to it, Counselor, to judge between us as a bodymaster should. What is it, then? A young lady? She's free to choose for herself. Is she? Cried Baldwin. As between you two brothers of the lodge, I should say that she was, said the boss. Oh, that's your ruling, is it? Yes, it is, Ted Baldwin, said McGinty with a wicked stare. Is it you that would dispute it? You would throw over one that has stood by you this 5 years in favor of a man that you never saw before in your life? You're not bodymaster for life, Jack McGinty, and by God, when it next comes to a vote— The counselor sprang at him like a tiger. His hand closed round the other's neck, and he hurled him back across one of the barrels. In his mad fury, he would have squeezed the life out of him if McMurdo had not interfered. Easy, Counselor, for heaven's sake, go easy, he cried as he dragged him back. McGinty released his hold, and Baldwin, cowed and shaken, gasping for breath, and shivering in every limb, as one who has looked over the very edge of death, sat upon the barrel over which he had been hurled. You've been asking for it this many a day, Ted Baldwin. Now you've got it, cried McGinty, his huge chest rising and falling. Maybe you think I was voted down from bodymaster. You would find yourself in my shoes. It's for the lodge to say that. But so long as I am the chief, I'll have no man lift his voice against me or my rulings."
"I have nothing against you," mumbled Baldwin, feeling his throat.
"Well then,"
cried the other, relapsing in a moment into a bluff joviality,
"we're all good friends again, and there's the end of the matter."
He took a bottle of champagne down from the shelf and twisted out the cork.
"See now," he continued,
as he filled 3 high glasses,
"let us drink the quarrelling toast of the lodge. After that, as you know, there can be no bad blood between us. Now, then the left hand on the apple of my throat, I say to you, Ted Baldwin, what is the offence, sir?"
"The clouds are heavy," answered Baldwin.
"But they will forever brighten."
"And this I swear." The men drank their glasses, and the same ceremony was performed between Baldwin and McMurdo.
"There!"
cried McGinty, rubbing his hands.
"That's the end of the black blood. You come under lodge discipline if it goes further, and that's a heavy hand in these parts, as Brother Baldwin knows, and as you will damn soon find out, Brother McMurdo, if you ask for trouble."
"Faith, I'd be slow to do that," said McMurdo. He held out his hand to Baldwin. "I'm quick to quarrel and quick to forgive. It's my hot Irish blood, they tell me. But it's over for me, and I bear no grudge." Baldwin had to take the proffered hand, for the baleful eye of the terrible boss was upon him. But his sullen face showed how little the words of the other had moved him. McGinty clapped them both on the shoulders.
"Tut, these girls, he cried. "To think that the same petticoat should come between 2 of my boys. It's the devil's own luck. Well, it's the colleen inside of them that must settle the question. For it's outside the jurisdiction of a bodymaster, and the Lord be praised for that. We have enough on us, without the women as well. You'll have to be affiliated to Lodge 341, Brother McMurdo. We have our own ways and methods, different from Chicago. Saturday night is our meeting, and if you come then, we'll make you free forever of the Vermissa Valley."
Part 2, Chapter 3. Lodge 341, Vermissa. On the day following the evening which had contained so many exciting events, McMurdo moved his lodgings from old Jacob Shafter's and took up his quarters at the widow McNamara's on the extreme outskirts of the town. Scanlon, his original acquaintance aboard the train, had occasion shortly afterwards to move into Vermissa, and the two lodged together. There was no other boarder, and the hostess was an easy-going old Irishwoman who left them to themselves, so that they had a freedom for speech and action welcome to men who had secrets in common. Shafter had relented to the extent of letting McMurdo come to his meals there when he liked, so that his intercourse with Etty was by no means broken. On the contrary, it drew closer and more intimate as the weeks went by. In his bedroom at his new abode, McMurdo felt it safe to take out the coining moulds, and under many a pledge of secrecy, a number of brothers from the lodge were allowed to come in and see them, each carrying away in his pocket some examples of the false money, so cunningly struck that there was never the slightest difficulty or danger in passing it. Why, with such a wonderful art at his command, McMurdo should condescend to work at all was a perpetual mystery to his companions, though he made it clear to anyone who asked him that if he lived without any visible means, it would very quickly bring the police upon his track. One policeman was indeed after him already, but the incident, as luck would have it, did the adventurer a great deal more good than harm. After the first introduction, there were few evenings when he did not find his way to McGinty's saloon, there to make a closer acquaintance with the boys,
which was the jovial title by which the dangerous gang who infested the place were known to one another. His dashing manner and fearlessness of speech made him a favourite with them all, while the rapid and scientific way in which he polished off his antagonist in an all-in barroom scrap earned the respect of that rough community. Another incident, however, raised him even higher in their estimation. Just at the crowded hour one night, the door opened and a man entered with the quiet blue uniform and peaked cap of the mine police. This was a special body raised by the railways and colliery owners to supplement the efforts of the ordinary civil police, who were perfectly helpless in the face of the organised ruffianism which terrorised the district. There was a hush as he entered, and many a curious glance was cast at him, but the relations between policemen and criminals are peculiar in some parts of the States, and McGinty himself, standing behind his counter, showed no surprise when the policeman enrolled himself among his customers. "A straight whisky, for the night is bitter," said the police officer. "I don't think we have met before, councillor." "You'll be the new captain," said McGinty. "That's so. We're looking to you, councillor, and to the other leading citizens, to help us in upholding law and order in this township. Captain Marvin is my name." "We do better without you, Captain Marvin," said McGinty coldly, "for we have our own police of the township, and no need of any imported goods. What are you but the paid tool of the capitalists, hired by them to club or shoot your poorer fellow citizen?"
Well, we won't argue about that," said the police officer good-humouredly. "I expect we all do our duty same as we see it, but we can't all see it the same." He had drunk off his glass and had turned to go, when his eyes fell upon the face of Jack McMurdo, who was scowling at his elbow. Hello, he cried, looking him up and down. "Here's an old acquaintance." McMurdo shrank away from him. "I was never a friend to you, nor any other cursed copper in my life," said he. "An acquaintance isn't always a friend," said the police captain, grinning. "You're Jack McMurdo of Chicago, right enough, and don't you deny it." McMurdo shrugged his shoulders. "I'm not denying it," said he. "Do you think I'm ashamed of my own name?" "You've got good cause to be, anyhow." "What the devil do you mean by that?" he roared with his fists clenched. No, Jack, bluster won't do with me. I was an officer in Chicago before ever I came to this darn coal bunker, and I know a Chicago crook when I see one." McMurdo's face fell. "Don't tell me that you're Marvin of the Chicago Central," he cried. "Just the same old Teddy Marvin at your service. We haven't forgotten the shooting of Jonas Pinto up there." "I never shot him." "Did you not? That's good impartial evidence, ain't it? Well, his death came in uncommon handy for you, or they would have had you for shoving the queer. Well, we can let that be bygones. For between you and me, and perhaps I'm going further than my duty in saying it, they could get no clear case against you, and Chicago's open to you tomorrow." "I'm very well where I am." "Well, I've given you the pointer, and you're a sulky dog not to thank me for it." "Well, I suppose you mean well, and I do thank you," said McMurdo in no very gracious manner. "It's mum with me so long as I see you living on the straight," said the captain. "But, by the Lord, if you get off after this, it's another story. So, good night to you, and good night, councillor." He left the barroom, but not before he had created a local hero. McMurdo's deeds in far Chicago had been whispered before. He had put off all questions with a smile, as one who did not wish to have greatness thrust upon him. But now the thing was officially confirmed. The bar loafers crowded round him and shook him heartily by the hand. He was free of the community from that time on.
He could drink hard and show little trace of it, but that evening, had his mate Scanlon not been at hand to lead him home, the feted hero would surely have spent his night under the bar. On a Saturday night, McMurdo was introduced to the lodge. He had thought to pass in without ceremony as being an initiate of Chicago, but there were particular rites in Vermissa of which they were proud, and these had to be undergone by every postulant. The assembly met in a large room reserved for such purposes at the Union House. Some 60 members assembled at Vermissa, but that by no means represented the full strength of the organization, for there were several other lodges in the valley, and others across the mountains on each side, who exchanged members when any serious business was afoot, so that a crime might be done by men who were strangers to the locality. Altogether, there were not less than 500 scattered over the coal district. In the bare assembly room, the men were gathered round a long table. At the side was a second one laden with bottles and glasses, on which some members of the company were already turning their eyes. McGinty sat at the head, with a flat black velvet cap upon his shock of tangled black hair, and a coloured purple stole round his neck, so that he seemed to be a priest presiding over some diabolical ritual. To right and left of him were the higher lodge officials, the cruel, handsome face of Ted Baldwin among them. Each of these wore some scarf or medallion as emblem of his office. They were, for the most part, men of mature age, but the rest of the company consisted of young fellows from 18 to 25, the ready and capable agents who carried out the commands of their seniors. Among the older men were many whose features showed the tigerish, lawless souls within, but looking at the rank and file, it was difficult to believe that these eager and open-faced young fellows were in very truth a dangerous gang of murderers whose minds had suffered such complete moral perversion that they took a horrible pride in their proficiency at the business, and looked with deepest respect at the man who had the reputation of making what they called a clean job. To their contorted natures, it had become a spirited and chivalrous thing to volunteer for service against some man who had never injured them, and in whom, in many cases, they had never seen in their lives. The crime committed, they quarrelled as to who had actually struck the fatal blow, and amused one another and the company by describing the cries and contortions of the murdered man. At first, they had shown some secrecy in their arrangements, but at the time which this narrative describes their proceedings were extraordinarily open, for the repeated failure of the law had proved to them that on the one hand, no one would dare to witness against them, and upon the other, they had an unlimited number of staunch witnesses upon whom they could call, and a well-filled treasure chest from which they could draw the funds to engage the best legal talent in the state. In 10 long years of outrage, there had been no single conviction, and the only danger that ever threatened the Scowrers lay in the victim himself, who, however outnumbered and taken by surprise, might and occasionally did leave his mark upon his assailants. McMurdo had been warned that some ordeal lay before him, but no one would tell him in what it consisted. He was led now into an outer room by 2 solemn brothers. Through the plank partition he could hear the murmur of many voices from the assembly within. Once or twice he caught the sound of his own name, and he knew that they were discussing his candidacy. Then there entered an inner guard with a green and gold sash across his chest. "The bodymaster orders that he shall be trussed, blinded, and entered," said he. The 3 of them removed his coat, turned up the sleeve of his right arm, and finally passed a rope round above the elbows and made it fast. They next placed a thick black cap right over his head and the upper part of his face, so that he could see nothing. He was then led into the assembly hall. It was pitch dark and very oppressive under his hood. He heard the rustle and murmur of the people round him, and then the voice of McGinty sounded dull and distant through the covering of his ears. "John McMurdo," said the voice, "are you already a member of the ancient order of freemen?" He bowed in assent. "Is your lodge number 29 Chicago?" He bowed again. "Dark nights are unpleasant," said the voice. "Yes, for strangers to travel," he answered. "The clouds are heavy." "Yes, a storm is approaching." "Are the brethren satisfied?" asked the bodymaster. There was a general murmur of assent. "We know, brother, by your sign and by your countersign, that you are indeed one of us," said McGinty. "We would have you know, however, that in this county, and in the other counties of these parts, we have certain rights, and also certain duties of our own which call for good men. Are you ready to be tested?" "I am." "Are you stout of heart?" "I am." "Take a stride forward to prove it." As the words were said, he felt two hard points in front of his eyes, pressing upon them so that it appeared as if he could not move forward without a danger of losing them. None the less, he nerved himself to step resolutely out, and as he did so, the pressure melted away. There was a low murmur of applause. "He is stout of heart," said the voice. "Can you bear pain?" "As well as another," he answered. "Test him." It was all he could do to keep himself from screaming out, for an agonizing pain shot through his forearm. He nearly fainted at the sudden shock of it, but he bit his lip and clenched his hands to hide his agony. "I can take more than that," said he. This time there was loud applause. A finer first appearance had never been made in the lodge. Hands clapped him on the back, and the hood was plucked from his head. He stood blinking and smiling amid the congratulations of the brothers. "One last word, Brother McMurdo," said McGinty. "You have already sworn the oath of secrecy and fidelity, and you are aware that the punishment for any breach of it is instant and inevitable death?" "I am," said McMurdo. "And you accept the rule of the bodymaster for the time being under all circumstances?" "I do." "Then in the name of Lodge 341 Vermissa, I welcome you to its privileges and debates. You will put the liquor on the table, Brother Scanlon, and we will drink to our worthy brother." McMurdo's coat had been brought to him, but before putting it on, he examined his right arm, which still smarted heavily. There on the flesh of the forearm was a circle with a triangle within it, deep and red as the branding iron had left it. One or two of his neighbours pulled up their sleeves and showed their own lodge marks. "We've all had it," said one, "but not all as brave as you over it." "Tch, it was nothing," said he, "but it burned and ached all the same." When the drinks which followed the ceremony of initiation had all been disposed of, the business of the lodge proceeded. McMurdo, accustomed only to the prosaic performances of Chicago, listened with open ears and more surprise than he ventured to show to what followed. "The first business on the agenda paper," said McGinty, "is to read the following letter from Division Master Windle of Merton County Lodge 249. He says, 'Dear Sir, there is a job to be done on Andrew Ray of Ray and Sturmash, coal owners near this place. You will remember that your lodge owes us a return, having had the service of 2 brethren in the matter of the patrolman last fall. You will send 2 good men. They will be taken charge of by Treasurer Higgins of this lodge, whose address you know. He will show them when to act and where. Yours in freedom, J.W. Windle, D.M.A.O.F. Windle has never refused us when we have had occasion to ask him for the loan of a man or 2, and it is not for us to refuse him."
McGinty paused, and looked round the room with his dull, malevolent eyes.
"Who will volunteer for the job?"
Several young fellows held up their hands. The bodymaster looked at them with an approving smile.
"You'll do, Tiger Carmack. If you handle it as well as you did the last, you won't be wrong. And you, Wilson."
"I've no pistol," said the volunteer, a mere boy in his teens.
"It's your first, is it not? Well, you have to be blooded sometime. It'll be a great start for you. As to the pistol, you'll find it waiting for you, or I'm mistaken. If you report yourselves on Monday, it will be time enough. You'll get a great welcome when you return."
"Any reward this time?" asked Cormac, a thick-set, dark-faced, brutal-looking young man whose ferocity had earned him the nickname of Tiger.
"Never mind the reward. You just do it for the honor of the thing. Maybe when it's done, there will be a few odd dollars at the bottom of the box."
"What has the man done?" asked young Wilson.
"Sure, it's not for the likes of you to ask what the man has done. He has been judged over there. That's no business of ours. All we have to do is carry it out for them, same as they would for us. Speaking of that, 2 brothers from the Merton Lodge are coming over to us next week to do some business in this quarter."
"Who are they?" asked somebody.
"Faith, it is wiser not to ask. If you know nothing, you can testify nothing, and no trouble can come of it. But they are men who will make a clean job when they are about it."
"And time, too," cried Ted Baldwin. "Folk are getting out of hand in these parts. It was only last week that 3 of our men were turned off by Foreman Blaker. It's been owing him a long time, and he'll get it full and proper."
"Get what?"
McMurdo whispered to his neighbor.
"The business end of a buckshot cartridge,"
cried the man with a loud laugh.
"What think you of our ways, brother?"
McMurdo's criminal soul seemed to have already absorbed the spirit of the vile association of which he was now a member.
"I like it well,"
said he. "'Tis a proper place for a lad of metal." Several of those who sat around heard his words and applauded them.
"What's that?"
cried the black-maned bodymaster from the end of the table.
"'Tis our new brother, sir, who finds our ways to his taste."
McMurdo rose to his feet for an instant.
"I would say, eminent bodymaster, that if a man should be wanted, I should take it as an honor to be chosen to help the lodge."
There was great applause at this. It was felt that a new sun was pushing its rim above the horizon. To some of the elders, it seemed that the progress was a little too rapid.
"I would move,"
said the secretary, Harroway, a vultured-faced old grey-beard who sat near the chairman,
"that Brother McMurdo should wait until it is the good pleasure of the lodge to employ him."
"Sure, that was what I meant. I'm in your hands," said McMurdo.
"Your time will come, brother," said the chairman. "We have marked you down as a willing man, and we believe that you will do good work in these parts. There is a small matter tonight in which you may take a hand, if it so please you."
"I will wait for something that is worthwhile."
"You can come tonight anyhow, and it will help you to know what we stand for in this community. I will make the announcement later. Meanwhile," he glanced at his agenda paper, "I have 1 or 2 more points to bring before the meeting. First of all, I will ask the treasurer as to our bank balance." There is the pension to Jim Carnaway's widow. He was struck down doing the work of the lodge, and it is for us to see that she is not the loser.
Jim was shot last month when they tried to kill Chester Wilcox of Marley Creek,
McMurdo's neighbour informed him.
The funds are good at the moment,
said the treasurer with the bank book in front of him.
The firms have been generous of late. Max Linder & Co. paid $500 to be left alone. Walker Brothers sent in $100, but I took it on myself to return it and ask for $5. If I do not hear by Wednesday, their winding gear may get out of order. We had to burn their breaker last year before they became reasonable. Then the West Section Coaling Company has paid its annual contribution. We have enough on hand to meet any obligations.
What about Archie Swindon?
Asked a brother.
He has sold out and left the district. The old devil left a note for us to say that he'd rather be a free crossing sweeper in New York than a large mine owner under the power of a ring of blackmailers. By gar, it was as well that he made a break for it before the note reached us. I guess he won't show his face in this valley again.
An elderly, clean-shaved man with a kindly face and a good brow rose from the end of the table which faced the chairman.
Mr. Treasurer, he asked, may I ask who has bought the property of this man that we have driven out of the district?
Yes, Brother Morris, it has been bought by the State and Merton County Railroad Company.
And who bought the mines of Taubman and of Lee that came into the market in the same way last year?
The same company, Brother Morris.
And who bought the ironworks of Mason and of Schumann and of Van Deher and of Atwood, which have all been given up of late?
They were all bought by the West Gilmerton General Mining Company.
I don't see, Brother Morris, said the chairman, that it matters to us who buys them, since they can't carry themselves out of the district.
With all respect to you, eminent bodymaster, I think it may matter very much to us. This process has been going on now for 10 long years. We are gradually driving all the small men out of trade. What is the result? We find in their places great companies like the Railroad or the General Iron, who have their directors in New York or Philadelphia and care nothing for our threats. We can take it out of their local bosses, but it only means that others will be sent in their stead, and we are making it dangerous for ourselves. The small men could not harm us. They had not the money nor the power. So long as we did not squeeze them too dry, they would stay under our power. But if these big companies find that we stand between them and their profits, they will spare no pains and no expense to hunt us down and bring us to court.
There was a hush at these ominous words, and every face darkened as gloomy looks were exchanged. So omnipotent and unchallenged had they been, that the very thought that there was possible retribution in the background had been banished from their minds. And yet the idea struck a chill to the most reckless of them.
It is my advice,
the speaker continued,
that we go easier upon the small men. On the day that they have all been driven out, the power of this society will have been broken.
Unwelcome truths are not popular. There were angry cries as the speaker resumed his seat. McGinty rose with gloom upon his brow.
Brother Morris, said he, you were always a croaker. So long as the members of this lodge stand together, there is no power in the United States that can touch them. Sure, have we not tried it often enough in the law courts? I expect the big companies will find it easier to pay than to fight, same as the little companies do. And now, brethren,
McGinty took off his black velvet cap and his stole as he spoke.
This lodge has finished its business for the evening, save for one small matter which may be mentioned when we are parting. The time has now come for fraternal refreshment and for harmony."
Strange indeed is human nature. Here were these men to whom murder was familiar, who again and again had struck down the father of the family, some man against whom they had no personal feeling, without one thought of compunction or of compassion for his weeping wife or helpless children, and yet the tender or pathetic in music could move them to tears. McMurdo had a fine tenor voice, and if he had failed to gain the goodwill of the lodge before, it could no longer have been withheld after he had thrilled them with "I'm Sitting on the Stile, Mary," and "On the Banks of Allan Water." In his very first night, the new recruit had made himself one of the most popular of the brethren, marked already for advancement and high office. There were other qualities needed, however, besides those of good fellowship, to make a worthy freeman, and of these he was given an example before the evening was over. The whisky bottle had passed round many times, and the men were flushed and ripe for mischief, when their bodymaster rose once more to address them.
"Boys," said he, "there's one man in this town that wants trimming up, and it's for you to see that he gets it. I'm speaking of James Stanger of the Herald. You've seen how he's been opening his mouth against us again."
There was a murmur of assent, with many a muttered oath. McGinty took a slip of paper from his waistcoat pocket.
"Law and order. That's how he heads it. Reign of terror in the coal and iron district. 12 years have now elapsed since the first assassinations which proved the existence of a criminal organization in our midst. From that day these outrages have never ceased, until now they have reached a pitch which makes us the opprobrium of the civilized world. Is it for such results as this that our great country welcomes to its bosom the alien who flies from the despotisms of Europe? Is it that they shall themselves become tyrants over the very men who have given them shelter, and that a state of terrorism and lawlessness should be established under the very shadow of the sacred folds of the starry flag of freedom, which would raise horror in our minds if we read of it as existing under the most effete monarchy of the East? The men are known. The organization is patent and public. How long are we to endure it? Can we forever live? Sure, I read enough of this slush, cried the chairman, tossing the paper down upon the table. That's what he says of us. The question I'm asking you is what shall we say to him? Kill him, cried a dozen fierce voices.
I protest against that,
said Brother Morris, the man of the good brow and shaved face.
I tell you, brethren, that our hand is too heavy in this valley, and that there will come a point where in self-defense every man will unite to crush us out. James Stanger is an old man. He is respected in the township and the district. His paper stands for all that is solid in the valley. If that man is struck down, there will be a stir through the state that will only end with our destruction.
And how would they bring about our destruction, Mr. Standbeck? Cried McGinty. Is it by the police? Sure, half of them are in our pay and half of them are afraid of us. Or is it by the law courts and the judge? Haven't we tried that before now, and whatever came of it?
There is a Judge Lynch that might try the case,
said Brother Morris. A general shout of anger greeted the suggestion.
I have but to raise my finger, cried McGinty, and I could put 200 men into this town that would clear it from end to end.
Then, suddenly raising his voice and bending his huge black brows into a terrible frown,
See here, Brother Morris. I have my eye on you and have had for some time. You have no heart yourself, and you try to take the heart out of others. It will be an ill day for you, Brother Morris, when your own name comes on our agenda paper, and I'm thinking that it's just there that I ought to place it."
Morris had turned deadly pale, and his knees seemed to give way under him as he fell back into his chair. He raised his glass in his trembling hand and drank before he could answer.
"I apologize, eminent bodymaster, to you and to every brother in this lodge, if I have said more than I should. I am a faithful member, you all know that, and it is in my fear lest evil come to the lodge which makes me speak in anxious words. But I have greater trust in your judgment than in my own, eminent bodymaster, and I promise you that I will not offend again."
The bodymaster's scowl relaxed as he listened to the humble words.
"Very good, Brother Morris. It's myself that would be sorry if it were needful to give you a lesson. But so long as I am in this chair, we shall be a united lodge in word and in deed. And now, boys," he continued, looking round at the company, "I'll say this much, that if Stanger got his full deserts, there would be more trouble than we need ask for. These editors hang together, and every journal in the state would be crying out for police and troops. But I guess you can give him a pretty severe warning. Will you fix it, Brother Baldwin?"
"Sure," said the young man eagerly.
"How many will you take?"
"Half a dozen, and 2 to guard the door. You'll come, Gower, and you, Mansell, and you, Scanlon, and the 2 Willoughbys."
"I promised the new brother he should go," said the chairman.
Ted Baldwin looked at McMurdo with eyes which showed that he had not forgotten nor forgiven.
"Well, he can come if he wants," he said in a surly voice. "That's enough. The sooner we get to work, the better."
The company broke up with shouts and yells and snatches of drunken song. The bar was still crowded with revellers, and many of the brethren remained there. The little band, who had been told off for duty, passed out into the street, proceeding in 2s and 3s along the sidewalk so as not to provoke attention. It was a bitterly cold night, with a half-moon shining brilliantly in a frosty star-spangled sky. The men stopped and gathered in a yard which faced a high building. The words, "The Missa Herald," were printed in gold lettering between the brightly lit windows. From within came the clanking of the printing press.
"Here, you,"
said Baldwin to McMurdo.
"You can stand below at the door and see that the road is kept open for us. Arthur Willoughby can stay with you. You others come with me. Have no fear, boys, for we have a dozen witnesses that we are in the Union Bar at this very moment."
It was nearly midnight, and the street was deserted save for 1 or 2 revellers upon their way home. The party crossed the road, and, pushing open the door of the newspaper office, Baldwin and his men rushed in and up the stair which faced them. McMurdo and another remained below. From the room above came a shout, a cry for help, and then the sound of trampling feet and of falling chairs. An instant later, a grey-haired man rushed out on the landing. He was seized before he could get farther, and his spectacles came tinkling down to McMurdo's feet. There was a thud and a groan. He was on his face, and 6 sticks were clattering together as they fell upon him. He writhed, and his long, thin limbs quivered under the blows. The others ceased at last, but Baldwin, his cruel face set in an infernal smile, was hacking at the man's head, which he vainly endeavoured to defend with his arms. His white hair was dabbled with patches of blood. Baldwin was still stooping over his victim, putting in a short, vicious blow whenever he could see a part exposed, when McMurdo dashed up the stair and pushed him back. "You'll kill the man," said he. "Drop it." Baldwin looked at him in amazement. "Curse you," he cried. "Who are you to interfere? You that are new to the lodge. Stand back." He raised his stick, but McMurdo had whipped his pistol out of his pocket. "Stand back yourself," he cried. "I'll blow your face in if you lay a hand on me. As to the lodge, wasn't it the order of the bodymaster that the man was not to be killed? And what are you doing but killing him?" "It's truth, he says," remarked one of the men. "By gar, you best hurry yourselves," cried the man below. "The windows are all lighting up, and you'll have the whole town here inside 5 minutes." There was indeed the sound of shouting in the street, and a little group of compositors and pressmen was forming in the hall below and nerving itself to action. Leaving the limp and motionless body of the editor at the head of the stair, the criminals rushed down and made their way swiftly along the street. Having reached the Union House, some of them mixed with the crowd in McGinty's saloon, whispering across the bar to the boss that the job had been well carried through. Others, and among them McMurdo, broke away into side streets, and so by devious paths to their own homes. Part 2, Chapter 4. The Valley of Fear. When McMurdo woke next morning, he had good reason to remember his initiation into the lodge. His head ached with the effect of the drink, and his arm, where he had been branded, was hot and swollen. Having his own peculiar source of income, he was irregular in his attendance at work, so he had a late breakfast and remained at home for the morning, writing a long letter to a friend. Afterwards, he read the Daily Herald. In a special column, put in at the last moment, he read, "Outrage at the Herald office. Editor seriously injured." It was a short account of the facts, with which he was himself more familiar than the writer could have been. It ended with the statement, "The matter is now in the hands of the police, but it can hardly be hoped that their exertions will be attended by any better results than in the past. Some of the men were recognized, and there is hope that a conviction may be obtained. The source of the outrage was, it need hardly be said, that infamous society which has held this community in bondage for so long a period, and against which the Herald has taken so uncompromising a stand. Mr. Stanger's many friends will rejoice to hear that, though he has been cruelly and brutally beaten, and though he has sustained severe injuries about the head, there is no immediate danger to his life." Below it stated that a guard of police, armed with Winchester rifles, had been requisitioned for the defence of the office. McMurdo had laid down the paper and was lighting his pipe with a hand which was shaky from the excess of the previous evening, when there was a knock outside, and his landlady brought to him a note which had just been handed in by a lad. It was unsigned, and ran thus: "I should wish to speak to you, but would rather not do so in your house. You will find me beside the flagstaff upon Miller Hill. If you will come there now, I have something which it is important for you to hear and for me to say." McMurdo read the note twice with the utmost surprise, for he could not imagine what it meant or who was the author of it. Had it been in a feminine hand, he might have imagined that it was the beginning of one of those adventures which had been familiar enough in his past life. But it was the writing of a man, and of a well-educated one too. Finally, after some hesitation, he determined to see the matter through. Miller Hill is an ill-kept public park in the very centre of the town. In summer, it is a favourite resort of the people, but in winter it is desolate enough. From the top of it, one has a view not only of the whole straggling, grimy town, but of the winding valley beneath, with its scattered mines and factories blackening the snow on each side of it, and of the wooded and white-capped ranges flanking it. McMurdo strolled up the winding path, hedged in with evergreens, until he reached the deserted restaurant, which forms the centre of summer gaiety. Beside it was a bare flagstaff, and underneath it a man, his hat drawn down and the collar of his overcoat turned up. When he turned his face, McMurdo saw that it was Brother Morris, he who had incurred the anger of the bodymaster the night before. The lodge sign was given and exchanged as they met.
"I wanted to have a word with you, Mr. McMurdo,"
said the older man, speaking with a hesitation which showed that he was on delicate ground.
"It was kind of you to come."
"Why did you not put your name on the note?"
"One has to be cautious, mister. One never knows in times like these how a thing may come back to one. One never knows either who to trust or who not to trust."
"Surely one may trust brothers of the lodge."
No, not always,"
cried Morris with vehemence.
"Whatever we say, even what we think, seems to go back to that man McGinty."
"Look here," said McMurdo sternly. "It was only last night, as you well know, that I swore good faith to our bodymaster. Would you be asking me to break my oath?"
"If that is the view you take," said Morris sadly, "I can only say that I am sorry I gave you the trouble to come and meet me. Things have come to a bad pass when two free citizens cannot speak their thoughts to each other."
McMurdo, who had been watching his companion very narrowly, relaxed somewhat in his bearing. "Sure, I spoke for myself only," said he. "I am a newcomer, as you know, and I am strange to it all. It is not for me to open my mouth, Mr. Morris, and if you think well to say anything to me, I am here to hear it."
"And to take it back to Boss McGinty,"
said Morris bitterly. "Indeed, then, you do me an injustice there," cried McMurdo. "For myself, I am loyal to the lodge, and so I tell you straight. But I would be a poor creature if I were to repeat to any other what you might say to me in confidence. It will go no further than me, though I warn you that you may get neither help nor sympathy."
"I have given up looking for either the one or the other,"
said Morris.
"I may be putting my very life in your hands by what I say, but bad as you are, and it seemed to me last night that you were shaping to be as bad as the worst, still you are new to it, and your conscience cannot yet be as hardened as theirs. That was why I thought to speak with you."
"Well, what have you to say?"
"If you give me away, may a curse be on you."
"Sure, I said I would not."
"I would ask you then, when you joined the Freeman Society in Chicago and swore vows of charity and fidelity, did ever it cross your mind that you might find it would lead you to crime?"
"If you call it crime," McMurdo answered.
"Call it crime?"
cried Morris, his voice vibrating with passion.
"You have seen little of it if you can call it anything else. Was it crime last night when a man old enough to be your father was beaten till the blood dripped from his white hairs? Was that crime? Or what else would you call it?"
"There are some would say it was war," said McMurdo. "A war of two classes with all in, so that each struck as best it could."
"Well, did you think of such a thing when you joined the Freeman Society at Chicago?"
"No, I'm bound to say I did not."
"Nor did I when I joined it at Philadelphia. It was just a benefit club and a meeting place for one's fellows. Then I heard of this place, cursed the hour that the name first fell upon my ears, and I came to better myself. My God, to better myself! My wife and 3 children came with me. I started a dry goods store on Market Square, and I prospered well. The word had gone round that I was a freeman, and I was forced to join the local lodge, same as you did last night. I've the badge of shame on my forearm and something worse branded on my heart. I found that I was under the orders of a black villain and caught in a meshwork of crime. What could I do? Every word I said to make things better was taken as treason, same as it was last night. I can't get away, for all I have in the world is in my store. If I leave the society, I know well that it means murder to me, and God knows what to my wife and children. Oh, man, it is awful, awful."
He put his hands to his face, and his body shook with convulsive sobs. McMurdo shrugged his shoulders. "You were too soft for the job," said he. "You are the wrong sort for such work."
"I had a conscience and a religion, but they made me a criminal among them. I was chosen for a job. If I backed down, I knew well what would come to me. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe it's the thought of my poor little woman and the children that makes me one. Anyhow, I went. I guess it will haunt me forever. It was a lonely house, 20 miles from here over the range yonder. I was told off for the door, same as you were last night. They could not trust me with the job. The others went in. When they came out, their hands were crimson to the wrists. As we turned away, a child was screaming out of the house behind us. It was a boy of 5 who had seen his father murdered. I nearly fainted with the horror of it, and yet I had to keep a bold and smiling face, for well I knew that if I did not, it would be out of my house that they would come next with their bloody hands, and it would be my little Fred that would be screaming for his father. But I was a criminal then, part sharer in a murder, lost forever in this world, and lost also in the next. I am a good Catholic, but the priest would have no word with me when he heard I was a Scowrer, and I am excommunicated from my faith. That's how it stands with me. And I see you going down the same road, and I ask you what the end is to be. Are you ready to be a cold-blooded murderer also, or can we do anything to stop it?"
"What would you do?" asked McMurdo abruptly. "You would not inform?"
"God forbid!" cried Morris. "Sure, the very thought would cost me my life."
"That's well," said McMurdo. "I'm thinking that you are a weak man, and that you make too much of the matter."
"Too much? Wait till you have lived here longer. Look down the valley. See the cloud of 100 chimneys that overshadows it? I tell you that the cloud of murder hangs thicker and lower than that over the heads of the people. It's the valley of fear, the valley of death. The terror is in the hearts of the people from the dusk to the dawn. Wait, young man, and you will learn for yourself."
"Well, I'll let you know what I think when I've seen more," said McMurdo carelessly. "What is very clear is that you are not the man for the place, and that the sooner you sell out, if you only get a dime a dollar for what the business is worth, the better it'll be for you. What you have said is safe with me, but by gar, if I thought you were an informer—"
"No, no!"
cried Morris piteously. "Well, let it rest at that. I'll bear what you have said in mind, and maybe someday I'll come back to it. I expect you meant kindly by speaking to me like this. Now, I'll be getting home."
"One word before you go," said Morris. "We may have been seen together. They may want to know what we have spoken about."
"Ah, that's well thought of."
"I offer you a clerkship in my store."
"And I refuse it. That's our business. Well, so long, Brother Morris, and may you find things go better with you in the future." That same afternoon, as McMurdo sat smoking, lost in thought beside the stove of his sitting room, the door swung open, and its framework was filled with the huge figure of Boss McGinty. He passed the sign, and then seating himself opposite to the young man, he looked at him steadily for some time, a look which was as steadily returned. "I'm not much of a visitor, Brother McMurdo,"
he said at last. "I guess I'm too busy over the folk that visit me. But I thought I'd stretch a point and drop down to see you in your own house." "I'm proud to see you here, Counselor," McMurdo answered heartily, bringing his whiskey bottle out of the cupboard. "It's an honor that I had not expected." "How's the arm?" asked the boss. McMurdo made a wry face. "Well, I'm not forgetting it," he said, "but it's worth it." "Yes, it's worth it," the other answered, "to those that are loyal and go through with it, and are a help to the lodge. What were you speaking to Brother Morris about on Miller Hill this morning?" The question came so suddenly that it was well that he had his answer prepared. He burst into a hearty laugh. "Morris didn't know I could earn a living here at home. He shan't know either, for he has got too much conscience for the likes of me. But he's a good-hearted old chap. It was his idea that I was at a loose end, and that he would do me a good turn by offering me a clerkship in a dry goods store." "Oh, that was it?" "Yes, that was it." "And you refused it?" "Sure. Couldn't I earn 10 times as much in my own bedroom with 4 hours' work?" "That's so. But I wouldn't get about too much with Morris." "Why not?" "Well, I guess because I tell you not. That's enough for most folk in these parts." "It may be enough for most folk, but it ain't enough for me, Counselor," said McMurdo boldly. "If you are a judge of men, you'll know that." The swarthy giant glared at him, and his hairy paw closed for an instant round the glass as though he would hurl it at the head of his companion. Then he laughed in his loud, boisterous, insincere fashion. "You're a queer card for sure," said he. "Well, if you want reasons, I'll give them. Did Morris say nothing to you against the lodge?" "No." "Nor against me?" "No." "Well, that's because he daren't trust you. But in his heart he is not a loyal brother. We know that well. So we watch him, and we wait for the time to admonish him. I'm thinking that the time is drawing near. There's no room for scabby sheep in our pen. But if you keep company with a disloyal man, we might think that you were disloyal too. See? There's no chance of my keeping company with him, for I dislike the man," McMurdo answered. "As to being disloyal, if it was any man but you, he would not use the word to me twice." "Well, that's enough," said McGinty, draining off his glass. "I came down to give you a word in season, and you've had it." "I'd like to know," said McMurdo, "how you ever came to learn that I had spoken with Morris at all." McGinty laughed. "It's my business to know what goes on in this township," said he. "I guess you'd best reckon on my hearing all that passes. Well, time's up, and I'll just say—" But his leave-taking was cut short in a very unexpected fashion. With a sudden crash the door flew open, and 3 frowning, intent faces glared in at them from under the peaks of police caps. McMurdo sprang to his feet and half drew his revolver, but his arm stopped midway as he became conscious that 2 Winchester rifles were levelled at his head. A man in uniform advanced into the room, a 6-shooter in his hand. It was Captain Marvin, once of Chicago, and now of the Mine Constabulary. He shook his head with half a smile at McMurdo. "I thought you'd be getting into trouble, Mr. Crooked McMurdo of Chicago," said he. "Can't keep out of it, can you? Take your hat and come along with us." "I guess you'll pay for this, Captain Marvin," said McGinty. "Who are you, I'd like to know, to break into a house in this fashion and molest honest, law-abiding men?"
"You're standing out in this deal, Councillor McGinty," said the police captain. "We're not after you, but after this man McMurdo. It is for you to help, not to hinder us in our duty."
"He is a friend of mine, and I'll answer for his conduct," said the boss.
"By all accounts, Mr. McGinty, you may have to answer for your own conduct some of these days," the captain answered. "This man McMurdo was a crook before ever he came here, and he's a crook still. Cover him, patrolman, while I disarm him."
"There's my pistol," said McMurdo coolly.
"Maybe, Captain Marvin, if you and I were alone and face to face, you would not take me so easily."
"Where's your warrant?" asked McGinty. "By gar, a man might as well live in Russia as in Vermissa, while folk like you are running the police. It's a capitalist outrage, and you'll hear more of it, I reckon."
"You do what you think is your duty the best way you can, Councillor. We'll look after ours."
"What am I accused of?" asked McMurdo.
"Of being concerned in the beating of old Editor Stanger at the Herald office. It wasn't your fault that it isn't a murder charge."
"Ha ha ha! Well, if that's all you have against him," cried McGinty with a laugh, "you can save yourself a deal of trouble by dropping it right now. This man was with me in my saloon playing poker up till midnight, and I can bring a dozen to prove it."
"That's your affair, and I guess you can settle it in court tomorrow. Meanwhile, come on, McMurdo, and come quietly if you don't want a gun across your head. You stand wide, Mr. McGinty, for I warn you, I will stand no resistance when I'm on duty." So determined was the appearance of the captain that both McMurdo and his boss were forced to accept the situation. The latter managed to have a few whispered words with the prisoner before they departed.
"What about?"
He jerked his thumb upward to signify the coining plant.
"All right,"
whispered McMurdo, who had devised a safe hiding place under the floor.
"I'll bid you goodbye,"
said the boss, shaking hands.
"I'll see Riley the lawyer and take the defense upon myself. Take my word for it that they won't be able to hold you."
"I wouldn't bet on that. Guard the prisoner, you two, and shoot him if he tries any games. I'll search the house before I leave." He did so, but apparently found no trace of the concealed plant. When he had descended, he and his men escorted McMurdo to headquarters. Darkness had fallen, and a keen blizzard was blowing, so that the streets were nearly deserted. But a few loiterers followed the group, and, emboldened by invisibility, shouted imprecations at the prisoner.
"Lynch the cursed Scowrer!" they cried. "Lynch him!"
They laughed and jeered as he was pushed into the police station. After a short formal examination from the inspector in charge, he was put into the common cell. Here he found Baldwin and 3 other criminals of the night before, all arrested that afternoon and waiting their trial next morning. But even within this inner fortress of the law, the long arm of the freeman was able to extend. Late at night, there came a jailer with a straw bundle for their bedding, out of which he extracted 2 bottles of whisky, some glasses, and a pack of cards. They spent a hilarious night without an anxious thought as to the ordeal of the morning. Nor had they cause, as the result was to show. The magistrate could not possibly, on the evidence, have held them for a higher court. On the one hand, the compositors and pressmen were forced to admit that the light was uncertain, that they themselves were much perturbed, and that it was difficult for them to swear to the identity of the assailants, although they believed that the accused were among them. Cross-examined by the clever attorney, who had been engaged by McGinty, they were even more nebulous in their evidence. The injured man had already deposed that he was so taken by surprise by the suddenness of the attack that he could state nothing beyond the fact that the first man who struck him wore a moustache. He added that he knew them to be Scowrers, since no one else in the community could possibly have any enmity to him, and he had long been threatened on account of his outspoken editorials. On the other hand,
It was clearly shown by the united and unfaltering evidence of 6 citizens, including that high municipal official, Councillor McGinty, that the men had been at a card party at the Union House until an hour very much later than the commission of the outrage. Needless to say that they were discharged with something very near to an apology from the bench for the inconvenience to which they had been put, together with an implied censure of Captain Marvin and the police for their officious zeal. The verdict was greeted with loud applause by a court in which McMurdo saw many familiar faces. Brothers of the lodge smiled and waved. But there were others who sat with compressed lips and brooding eyes as the men filed out of the dock. One of them, a little dark-bearded, resolute fellow, put the thoughts of himself and comrades into words as the ex-prisoners passed him.
"You damned murderers," he said. "We'll fix you yet."
Part 2, Chapter 5. The Darkest Hour. If anything had been needed to give an impetus to Jack McMurdo's popularity among his fellows, it would have been his arrest and acquittal. That a man on the very night of joining the lodge should have done something which brought him before the magistrate was a new record in the annals of the society. Already he had earned the reputation of a good boon companion, a cheery reveller, and withal a man of high temper, who would not take an insult, even from the all-powerful boss himself. But in addition to this, he impressed his comrades with the idea that among them all there was not one whose brain was so ready to devise a bloodthirsty scheme, or whose hand would be more capable of carrying it out.
"He'll be the boy for the clean job,"
said the oldsters to one another, and waited their time until they could set him to his work. McGinty had instruments enough already, but he recognized that this was a supremely able one. He felt like a man holding a fierce bloodhound in leash. There were curs to do smaller work, but some day he would slip this creature upon its prey. A few members of the lodge, Ted Baldwin among them, resented the rapid rise of the stranger and hated him for it, but they kept clear of him, for he was as ready to fight as to laugh. But if he gained favour with his fellows, there was another quarter, one which had become even more vital to him, in which he lost it. Etty Shafter's father would have nothing more to do with him, nor would he allow him to enter the house. Etty herself was too deeply in love to give up altogether, and yet her own good sense warned her of what would come from a marriage with a man who was regarded as a criminal. One morning, after a sleepless night, she determined to see him, possibly for the last time, and make one strong endeavour to draw him from those evil influences which were sucking him down. She went to his house, as he had often begged her to do, and made her way into the room which he used as his sitting room. He was seated at a table, with his back turned and a letter in front of him. A sudden spirit of girlish mischief came over her. She was still only 19. He had not heard her when she pushed open the door. Now she tiptoed forward and laid her hand lightly upon his bended shoulders. If she had expected to startle him, she certainly succeeded, but only in turn to be startled herself. With a tiger's spring, he turned on her, and his right hand was feeling for her throat. At the same instant, with the other hand, he crumpled up the paper that lay before him. For an instant, he stood glaring. Then astonishment and joy took the place of the ferocity which had convulsed his features, a ferocity which had sent her shrinking back in horror as from something which had never before intruded into her gentle life. "It's you," he said, mopping his brow,
And to think that you should come to me, heart of my heart, and I should find nothing better to do than want to strangle you? Come then, darling."
And he held out his arms.
"Let me make it up to you."
But she had not recovered from that sudden glimpse of guilty fear which she had read in the man's face. All her woman's instinct told her that it was not the mere fright of a man who is startled. Guilt. That was it. Guilt and fear.
"What's come over you, Jack?" she cried. "Why are you so scared of me? Oh, Jack, if your conscience was at ease, you would not have looked at me like that."
"Sure, I was thinking of other things, and when you came tripping so lightly on those fairy feet of yours—"
No, it was more than that, Jack."
Then a sudden suspicion seized her.
"Let me see that letter you were writing."
"Ah, Etty, I couldn't do that."
Her suspicions became certainties.
"It's to another woman," she cried. "I know it. Why else should you hold it from me? Was it to your wife that you were writing? How am I to know that you are not a married man? You, a stranger that nobody knows."
"I am not married, Etty. See now, I swear it. You're the only one woman on earth for me. By the cross of Christ, I swear it."
He was so white with passionate earnestness that she could not but believe him.
"Well then," she cried, "why will you not show me the letter?"
"I'll tell you, acushla," said he. "I am under oath not to show it, and just as I wouldn't break my word to you, so I would keep it to those who hold my promise. It's the business of the lodge, and even to you it's secret. And if I was scared when a hand fell on me, can't you understand it when it might have been the hand of a detective?"
She felt that he was telling the truth. He gathered her into his arms and kissed away her fears and doubts.
"Sit here by me, then. It's a queer throne for such a queen, but it's the best your poor lover can find. He'll do better for you some of these days, I'm thinking. Now, your mind is easy once again, is it not?"
"How can it ever be at ease, Jack, when I know that you are a criminal among criminals, when I never know the day that I may hear you are in court for murder? McMurdo the Scowrer. That's what one of our boarders called you yesterday. It went through my heart like a knife."
"Sure, hard words break no bones."
"But they were true."
"Well, dear, it's not so bad as you think. We are but poor men that are trying in our own way to get our rights."
Etty threw her arms round her lover's neck.
"Give it up, Jack, for my sake. For God's sake, give it up. It was to ask you that I came here today. Oh, Jack, see, I beg it of you on my bended knees. Kneeling here before you, I implore you to give it up."
He raised her and soothed her with her head against his breast.
"Sure, my darling, you don't know what it is you are asking. How could I give it up when it would be to break my oath and to desert my comrades? If you could see how things stand with me, you could never ask it of me. Besides, if I wanted to, how could I do it? You don't suppose that the lodge would let a man go free with all its secrets?"
"I've thought of that, Jack. I've planned it all. Father has saved some money. He is weary of this place where the fear of these people darkens our lives. He is ready to go. We would fly together to Philadelphia or New York, where we would be safe from them."
McMurdo laughed.
"The lodge has a long arm. Do you think it could not stretch from here to Philadelphia or New York?"
"Well, then to the west, or to England, or to Germany, where Father came from. Anywhere to get away from this valley of fear."
McMurdo thought of old Brother Morris.
"Sure, it is the second time I've heard the valley so named," said he. "The shadow does indeed seem to lie heavy on some of you."
"It darkens every moment of our lives. Do you suppose that Ted Baldwin has ever forgiven us? If it were not that he fears you, what do you suppose our chances would be? If you saw the look in those dark, hungry eyes of him when they fell on me."
By gar, I'd teach him better manners if I caught him at it. But see here, little girl, I can't leave here. I can't. Take that from me once and for all. But if you will leave me to find my own way, I will try to prepare a way of getting honorably out of it.
There is no honor in such a matter.
Well, it's just how you look at it. But if you'll give me 6 months, I'll work it so that I can leave without being ashamed to look others in the face.
The girl laughed with joy. 6 months, she cried. Is it a promise?
Well, it may be 7 or 8, but within a year at the farthest, we will leave the valley behind us.
It was the most that Etty could obtain, and yet it was something. There was this distant light to illuminate the gloom of the immediate future. She returned to her father's house, more light-hearted than she had ever been since Jack McMurdo had come into her life. It might be thought that as a member all the doings of the society would be told to him, but he was soon to discover that the organization was wider and more complex than the simple lodge. Even Boss McGinty was ignorant as to many things, for there was an official named the county delegate, living at Hobson's Patch farther down the line, who had power over several different lodges, which he wielded in a sudden and arbitrary way. Only once did McMurdo see him, a sly little grey-haired rat of a man, with a slinking gait and a sidelong glance which was charged with malice. Evans Pott was his name, and even the great boss of Vermissa felt towards him something of the repulsion and fear which the huge Danton may have felt for the puny but dangerous Robespierre. One day Scanlon, who was McMurdo's fellow boarder, received a note from McGinty enclosing one from Evans Pott, which informed him that he was sending over 2 good men, Lawler and Andrews, who had instructions to act in the neighbourhood, though it was best for the cause that no particulars as to their objects should be given. Would the bodymaster see to it that suitable arrangements be made for their lodgings and comfort until the time for action should arrive? McGinty added that it was impossible for anyone to remain secret at the Union House, and that, therefore, he would be obliged if McMurdo and Scanlon would put the strangers up for a few days in their boarding-house. The same evening, the 2 men arrived, each carrying his gripsack. Lawler was an elderly man, shrewd, silent, and self-contained, clad in an old black frock coat, which with his soft felt hat and ragged grizzled beard gave him a general resemblance to an itinerant preacher. His companion Andrews was little more than a boy, frank-faced and cheerful, with the breezy manner of one who is out for a holiday and means to enjoy every minute of it. Both men were total abstainers, and behaved in all ways as exemplary members of the society, with the one simple exception that they were assassins, who had often proved themselves to be most capable instruments for this association of murder. Lawler had already carried out 14 commissions of the kind, and Andrews 3. They were, as McMurdo found, quite ready to converse about their deeds in the past, which they recounted with the half-bashful pride of men who had done good and unselfish service for the community. They were reticent, however, as to the immediate job in hand.
"They chose us because neither I nor the boy here drink," Lawler explained. "They can count on us saying no more than we should. You must not take it amiss, but it is the orders of the county delegate that we obey."
"Sure, we're all in it together," said Scanlon, McMurdo's mate, as the 4 sat together at supper.
"There are half a dozen about here that I have a word to say to," said McMurdo with an oath. "I suppose it isn't Jack Knox of Iron Hill that you are after? I'd go some way to see him get his deserts. No, it's not him yet.
Or Hermann Strauss?
No, nor him either. Well, if you won't tell us, we can't make you, but I'd be glad to know. Lawless smiled and shook his head. He was not to be drawn. In spite of the reticence of their guests, Scanlon and McMurdo were quite determined to be present at what they called the fun. When, therefore, at an early hour one morning, McMurdo heard them creeping down the stairs, he awakened Scanlon, and the two hurried on their clothes. When they were dressed, they found that the others had stolen out, leaving the door open behind them. It was not yet dawn, and by the light of the lamps they could see the two men some distance down the street. They followed them warily, treading noiselessly in the deep snow. The boarding-house was near the edge of town, and soon they were at the crossroads which is beyond its boundary. Here 3 men were waiting, with whom Lawler and Andrews held a short, eager conversation. Then they all moved on together. It was clearly some notable job which needed numbers. At this point there are several trails which lead to various mines. The strangers took that which led to the Crow Hill, a huge business which was in strong hands, which had been able, thanks to their energetic and fearless New England manager, Josiah H. Dunn, to keep some order and discipline during the long reign of terror. Day was now breaking, and a line of workmen were slowly making their way, singly and in groups, along the blackened path. McMurdo and Scanlon strolled on with the others, keeping in sight of the men whom they followed. A thick mist lay over them, and from the heart of it there came the sudden scream of a steam whistle. It was the 10-minute signal before the cages descended and the day's labour began. When they reached the open space round the mine shaft, there were 100 miners waiting, stamping their feet and blowing on their fingers, for it was bitterly cold. The strangers stood in a little group under the shadow of the engine-house. Scanlon and McMurdo climbed a heap of slag from which the whole scene lay before them. They saw the mine engineer, a great bearded Scotchman named Menzies, come out of the engine-house and blow his whistle for the cages to be lowered. At the same instant, a tall, loose-framed young man with a clean-shaved, earnest face advanced eagerly towards the pit-head. As he came forward, his eyes fell upon the group, silent and motionless under the engine-house. The men had drawn down their hats and turned up their collars to screen their faces. For a moment the presentiment of death laid its cold hand upon the manager's heart. At the next he had shaken it off and saw only his duty towards intrusive strangers.
"Who are you?"
he asked as he advanced.
"What are you loitering there for?"
There was no answer, but the lad Andrews stepped forward and shot him in the stomach. The 100 waiting miners stood as motionless and helpless as if they were paralyzed. The manager clapped his 2 hands to the wound and doubled himself up. Then he staggered away, but another of the assassins fired and he went down sidewise, kicking and clawing among the heap of clinkers. Menzies the Scotchman gave a roar of rage at the sight and rushed with an iron spanner at the murderers, but he was met by 2 balls in the face which dropped him dead at their very feet. There was a surge forward of some of the miners and an inarticulate cry of pity and anger, but a couple of the strangers emptied their 6-shooters over the heads of the crowd, and they broke and scattered, some of them rushing wildly back to their homes in Vermissa. When a few of the bravest had rallied, and there was a return to the mine, the murderous gang had vanished in the mists of morning, without a single witness being able to swear to the identity of these men, who in front of 100 spectators had wrought this double crime. Scanlon and McMurdo made their way back, Scanlon somewhat subdued, for it was the first murder job that he had seen with his own eyes, and it appeared less funny than he had been led to believe. The horrible screams of the dead manager's wife pursued them as they hurried to the town. McMurdo was absorbed and silent, but he showed no sympathy for the weakening of his companion.
"Sure, it is like a war," he repeated. "What is it but a war between us and them, and we hit back where we best can."
There was a high revel in the lodge room at the Union House that night, not only over the killing of the manager and engineer of the Crow Hill mine, which would bring this organization into line with the other blackmailed and terror-stricken companies of the district, but also over a distant triumph which had been wrought by the hands of the lodge itself. It would appear that when the county delegate had sent over 5 good men to strike a blow in Vermissa, he had demanded that in return 3 Vermissa men should be secretly selected and sent across to kill William Hales of Stake Royal, one of the best-known and most popular mine owners in the Gilmerton district, a man who was believed not to have an enemy in the world, for he was in all ways a model employer. He had insisted, however, upon efficiency in the work, and had, therefore, paid off certain drunken and idle employees who were members of the all-powerful society. Coffin notices hung outside his door had not weakened his resolution, and so in a free, civilized country he found himself condemned to death. The execution had now been duly carried out. Ted Baldwin, who sprawled now in the seat of honour beside the bodymaster, had been chief of the party. His flushed face and glazed bloodshot eyes told of sleeplessness and drink. He and his 2 comrades had spent the night before among the mountains. They were unkempt and weather-stained, but no heroes, returning from a forlorn hope, could have had a warmer welcome from their comrades. The story was told and retold amid cries of delight and shouts of laughter. They had waited for their man as he drove home at nightfall, taking their station at the top of a steep hill where his horse must be at a walk. He was so furred to keep out of the cold that he could not lay his hand on his pistol. They had pulled him out and shot him again and again. He had screamed for mercy. The screams were repeated for the amusement of the lodge. "Let's hear again how he squealed," they cried. None of them knew the man, but there is eternal drama in a killing, and they had shown the Scowrers of Gilmerton that the Vermissa men were to be relied upon. There had been one contretemps, for a man and his wife had driven up while they were still emptying their revolvers into the silent body. It had been suggested that they should shoot them both, but they were harmless folk who were not connected with the mines, so they were sternly bidden to drive on and keep silent, lest a worse thing befall them. And so the blood-mottled figure had been left as a warning to all such hard-hearted employers, and the 3 noble avengers had hurried off into the mountains, where unbroken nature comes down to the very edge of the furnaces and the slag heaps. Here they were safe and sound, their work well done, and the plaudits of their companions in their ears. It had been a great day for the Scowrers. The shadow had fallen even darker over the valley. But as the wise general chooses the moment of victory in which to redouble his efforts, so that his foes may have no time to steady themselves after disaster, so Boss McGinty, looking out upon the scene of his operations with his brooding and malicious eyes, had devised a new attack upon those who opposed him. That very night, as the half-drunken company broke up, he touched McMurdo on the arm and led him aside into that inner room, where they had their first interview. "See here, my lad," said he, "I've got a job that's worthy of you at last. You'll have the doing of it in your own hands."
"Proud I am to hear it," McMurdo answered.
"You could take 2 men with you, Manders and Riley. They have been warned for service. We'll never be right in this district until Chester Wilcox has been settled, and you'll have the thanks of every lodge in the coalfields if you can down him."
"I'll do my best anyhow. Who is he, and where shall I find him?" McGinty took his eternal half-chewed, half-smoked cigar from the corner of his mouth and proceeded to draw a rough diagram on a page torn from his notebook.
"He's the chief foreman of the Iron Dike Company. He's a hard citizen and an old color sergeant of the war, all scars and grizzle. We've had 2 tries at him, but had no luck, and Jim Carnaway lost his life over it. Now it's for you to take it over. That's the house, all alone on the Iron Dike crossroad, same as you see here on the map, without another within earshot. It's no good by day. He's armed and shoots quick and straight, with no questions asked. But at night, well, there he is with his wife, 3 children, and a hired help. You can't pick or choose. It's all or none. If you could get a bag of blasting powder at the front door with a slow match to it, what's the man done? Didn't I tell you he shot Jim Carnaway?
Why did he shoot him?
What in thunder has that to do with you? Carnaway was about his house at night, and he shot him. That's enough for me and you. You've got to settle the thing, right?
There's these 2 women and the children. Do they go up too?
They have to. Else how can we get him?
Seems hard on them, for they've done nothing.
What sort of fool's talk is this? Do you back out?
Easy, counselor, easy.
What have I ever said or done that you should think I would be after standing back from an order of the body master of my own lodge? If it's right or if it's wrong, it's for you to decide. You'll do it then.
Of course I'll do it.
When?
Well, you had best give me a night or 2 that I may see the house and make my plans. Then,
very good, said McGinty, shaking him by the hand. I'll leave it with you. It'll be a great day when you bring us the news. It's just the last stroke that will bring them all to their knees.
McMurdo thought long and deeply over the commission which had been so suddenly placed in his hands. The isolated house in which Chester Wilcox lived was about 5 miles off, in an adjacent valley. That very night he started off all alone to prepare for the attempt. It was daylight before he returned from his reconnaissance. Next day he interviewed his 2 subordinates, Manders and Riley, reckless youngsters who were as elated as if it were a deer hunt. 2 nights later they met outside the town, all 3 armed, and one of them carrying a sack stuffed with the powder which was used in the quarries. It was 2 in the morning before they came to the lonely house. The night was a windy one, with broken clouds drifting swiftly across the face of a 3/4 moon. They had been warned to be on their guard against bloodhounds, so they moved forward cautiously, with their pistols cocked in their hands. But there was no sound save the howling of the wind, and no movement but the swaying branches above them. McMurdo listened at the door of the lonely house, but all was still within. Then he leaned the powder bag against it, ripped a hole in it with his knife, and attached the fuse. When it was well alight, he and his 2 companions took to their heels and were some distance off, safe and snug in a sheltering ditch, before the shattering roar of the explosion, with the low, deep rumble of the collapsing building, told them that their work was done. No cleaner job had ever been carried out in the blood-stained annals of the society.
But alas, that work, so well organized and boldly carried out, should all have gone for nothing. Warned by the fate of the various victims, and knowing that he was marked down for destruction, Chester Wilcox had moved himself and his family only the day before to some safer and less-known quarters, where a guard of police should watch over them. It was an empty house which had been torn down by the gunpowder, and the grim old colour sergeant of the war was still teaching discipline to the miners of Iron Dyke. "Leave him to me," said McMurdo. "He's my man, and I'll get him sure if I have to wait a year for him." A vote of thanks and confidence was passed in full lodge, and so for the time the matter ended. When a few weeks later it was reported in the papers that Wilcox had been shot at from an ambuscade, it was an open secret that McMurdo was still at work upon his unfinished job. Such were the methods of the Society of Freemen, and such were the deeds of the Scowrers by which they spread their rule of fear over the great and rich district which was for so long a period haunted by their terrible presence. Why should these pages be stained by further crimes? Have I not said enough to show the men and their methods? These deeds are written in history, and there are records wherein one may read the details of them. There one may learn of the shooting of policemen Hunt and Evans, because they had ventured to arrest 2 members of the society, a double outrage planned at the Vermissa Lodge and carried out in cold blood upon 2 helpless and disarmed men. There also one may read of the shooting of Mrs. Larby, when she was nursing her husband, who had been beaten almost to death by orders of Boss McGinty. The killing of the elder Jenkins, shortly followed by that of his brother, the mutilation of James Murdoch, the blowing up of the Staphouse family, and the murder of the Stendals all followed hard upon one another in the same terrible winter. Darkly the shadow lay upon the Valley of Fear. The spring had come with running brooks and blossoming trees. There was hope for all nature bound so long in an iron grip, but nowhere was there any hope for the men and women who lived under the yoke of the terror. Never had the cloud above them been so dark and hopeless as in the early summer of the year 1875. Part 2, Chapter 6, Danger. It was the height of the Reign of Terror. McMurdo, who had already been appointed inner deacon, with every prospect of some day succeeding McGinty as bodymaster, was now so necessary to the counsels of his comrades that nothing was done without his help and advice. The more popular he became, however, with the freemen, the blacker were the scowls which greeted him as he passed along the streets of Vermissa. In spite of their terror, the citizens were taking heart to band themselves together against their oppressors. Rumours had reached the lodge of secret gatherings in the Herald office and of distribution of firearms among the law-abiding people. They were numerous, resolute, and well armed. Their opponents were scattered and powerless. It would all end, as it had done in the past, in aimless talk and possibly in impotent arrests. So said McGinty, McMurdo, and all the bolder spirits. It was a Saturday evening in May. Saturday was always the lodge night, and McMurdo was leaving his house to attend it when Morris, the weaker brother of the order, came to see him. His brow was creased with care, and his kindly face was drawn and haggard. "Can I speak with you freely, Mr. McMurdo?" "Sure." "I can't forget that I spoke my heart to you once, and that you kept it to yourself, even though the boss himself came to ask you about it." "What else could I do if you trusted me? It wasn't that I agreed with what you said."
"I know that well, But you are the one that I can speak to and be safe. I've a secret here."
He put his hand to his breast.
"And it is just burning the life out of me. I wish it had come to any one of you but me. If I tell it, it will mean murder for sure. If I don't, it may bring the end of us all. God help me, but I am near out of my wits over it."
McMurdo looked at the man earnestly. He was trembling in every limb. He poured some whiskey into a glass and handed it to him.
"That's the physic for the likes of you," said he. "Now, let me hear it."
Morris drank, and his white face took a tinge of colour.
"I can tell it to you all in one sentence," said he. "There's a detective on our trail."
McMurdo stared at him in astonishment.
"Why, man, you're crazy," he said. "Isn't the place full of police and detectives, and what harm did they ever do us?"
No, it's no man of the district. As you say, we know them, and it is little that they can do. But you've heard of the Pinkertons."
"I read of some folk of that name."
"Well, you can take it from me you've no show when they're on your trail. It's not a take-it-or-miss-it government concern. It's a dead-earnest business proposition that's out for results and keeps out till by hook or crook it gets them. If a Pinkerton man is deep in this business, we're all destroyed."
"We must kill him."
"Ah, it's the first thought that came to you. So it will be up at the lodge. Didn't I say to you that it would end in murder?"
"Sure, what is murder? Isn't it common enough in these parts?"
"It is indeed, but it's not for me to point out the man that is to be murdered. I'd never rest easy again, and yet it is our own necks that may be at stake. In God's name, what shall I do?"
He rocked to and fro in his agony of indecision. But his words had moved McMurdo deeply. It was easy to see that he shared the other's opinion as to the danger and the need for meeting it. He gripped Morris's shoulder and shook him in his earnestness.
"See here, man!"
he cried, and he almost screeched the words in his excitement.
"You won't gain anything by sitting keening like an old wife at a wake. Let's have the facts. Who is this fellow? Where is he? How did you hear of him? Why did you come to me?"
"I came to you, for you are the one man that would advise me. I told you that I had a store in the East before I came here. I left good friends behind me, and one of them is in the telegraph service. Here's a letter that I had from him yesterday. It's this part from the top of the page. You can read it yourself."
This was what McMurdo read. "How are the Scowrers getting on in your parts? We read plenty of them in the papers. Between you and me, I expect to hear news from you before long. 5 big corporations and the 2 railroads have taken the thing up in dead earnest. They mean it, and you can bet they'll get there. They are right deep down into it. Pinkerton has taken hold under their orders, and his best man, Birdie Edwards, is operating. The thing has got to be stopped right now.
Now, read the postscript.
Of course, what I give you is what I learned in business, so it goes no further. It's a queer cipher that you handle by the yard every day and can get no meaning from." McMurdo sat in silence for some time, with the letter in his listless hands. The mist had lifted for a moment, and there was the abyss before him.
"Does anyone else know of this?" he asked.
"I have told no one else."
"But this man, your friend, has he any other person that he would be likely to write to?"
"Well, I dare say he knows 1 or 2 more."
"Of the lodge?"
"It's likely enough."
"I was asking because it is likely that he may have given some description of this fellow Birdie Edwards. Then we could get on his trail."
"Well, it's possible, but I should not think he knew him.
He is just telling me the news that came to him by way of business. How would he know this Pinkerton man?"
McMurdo gave a violent start. "By God!" he cried. "I've got him! What a fool I was not to know it! Lord, but we're in luck. We'll fix him before he can do any harm. See here, Morris, will you leave this thing in my hands?"
"Sure, if you will only take it off of mine."
"I'll do that. You can stand right back and let me run it. Even your name need not be mentioned. I'll take it all on myself, as if it were to me that this letter has come. Will that content you?"
"It's just what I would ask."
"Then leave it at that, and keep your head shut. Now, I'll get down to the lodge, and we'll soon make old man Pinkerton sorry for himself."
"You wouldn't kill this man?"
"The less you know, friend Morris, the easier your conscience will be, and the better you will sleep. Ask no questions, and let these things settle themselves. I have hold of it now." Morris shook his head sadly as he left.
"I feel that his blood is on my hands," he groaned.
"Self-protection is no murder anyhow," said McMurdo, smiling grimly. "It's him or us. I guess this man would destroy us all if we left him long in the valley. Why, Brother Morris, we'll have to elect you bodymaster yet, for you've surely saved the lodge." And yet it was clear from his actions that he thought more seriously of this new intrusion than his words would show. It may have been his guilty conscience. It may have been the reputation of the Pinkerton organization. It may have been the knowledge that great rich corporations had set themselves the task of clearing out the Scowrers. But, whatever his reason, his actions were those of a man who is preparing for the worst. Every paper which would incriminate him was destroyed before he left the house. After that, he gave a long sigh of satisfaction, for it seemed to him that he was safe. And yet the danger must still have pressed somewhat upon him, for on his way to the lodge he stopped at Old Man Shafter's. The house was forbidden him, but when he tapped at the window, Etty came out to him. The dancing Irish deviltry had gone from her lover's eyes. She read his danger in his earnest face.
"Something has happened," she cried. "Oh, Jack, you are in danger."
"Sure. It's not very bad, my sweetheart, and yet it may be wise that we make a move before it is worse."
"Make a move?"
"I promised you once that I would go some day. I think the time is coming. I had news tonight, bad news, and I see trouble coming."
"The police?"
"Well, a Pinkerton. But sure, you wouldn't know what that is, Acushla, nor what it may mean to the likes of me. I'm in too deep in this thing, and I may have to get out of it quick. You said you would come with me if I went."
"Oh, Jack, it would be the saving of you."
"I'm an honest man in some things, Etty. I wouldn't hurt a hair of your bonny head for all that the world can give, nor ever pull you down 1 inch from your golden throne above the clouds where I always see you. Would you trust me?"
She put her hand in his without a word.
"Well then, listen to what I say, and do as I order you, for indeed it's the only way for us. Things are going to happen in this valley. I feel it in my bones. There may be many of us that will have to look out for ourselves. I am one anyhow. If I go, by day or night, it's that you must come with me."
"I'd come after you, Jack."
No, you shall come with me. If this valley is closed to me, and I can never come back, how can I leave you behind, and me perhaps in hiding from the police with never a chance of a message? It's with me you must come. I know a good woman in the place I come from, and it's there I'd leave you until we can get married. Will you come?"
"Yes, Jack, I will come."
"God bless you for your trust in me. It's a fiend out of hell that I should be if I abused it. Now mark you, Etty, it will be just a word to you, and when it reaches you, you will drop everything and come right down to the waiting room at the depot and stay there till I come for you."
"Day or night, I'll come at the word, Jack."
Somewhat eased in mind, now that his own preparations for escape had begun, McMurdo went on to the lodge. It had already assembled, and only by complicated signs and countersigns could he pass through the outer guard and inner guard who closet-tiled it. A buzz of pleasure and welcome greeted him as he entered. The long room was crowded, and through the haze of tobacco smoke he saw the tangled black mane of the bodymaster, the cruel unfriendly features of Baldwin, the vulture face of Harroway, the secretary, and a dozen more who were among the leaders of the lodge. He rejoiced that they should all be there to take counsel over his news.
"Indeed, it's glad we are to see you, brother," cried the chairman. "There's business here that wants a Solomon in judgment to set it right."
"It's Lander and Egan," explained his neighbor as he took his seat. "They both claim the head money given by the lodge for the shooting of Old Man Crab over at Stylestown, and who's to say which fired the bullet?" McMurdo rose in his place and raised his hand. The expression of his face froze the attention of the audience. There was a dead hush of expectation.
"Eminent Bodymaster," he said in a solemn voice, "I claim urgency."
"Brother McMurdo claims urgency," said McGinty. "It's a claim that by the rules of this lodge takes precedence. Now, brother, we attend you." McMurdo took the letter from his pocket. "Eminent Bodymaster and brethren," he said, "I am the bearer of ill news this day, but it is better that it should be known and discussed than that a blow should fall upon us without warning which would destroy us all. I have information that the most powerful and richest organizations in the state have bound themselves together for our destruction, and that at this very moment there is a Pinkerton detective, one Bertie Edwards, at work in the valley collecting the evidence which may put a rope round the necks of many of us and send every man in this room into a felon's cell. That is the situation for discussion of which I have made a claim of urgency." There was a dead silence in the room. It was broken by the chairman. "What is your evidence for this, Brother McMurdo?" he asked. "It is in this letter which has come into my hands," said McMurdo. He read the passage aloud. "It is a matter of honor with me that I can give no further particulars about the letter, nor put it into your hands, but I assure you that there is nothing else in it which can affect the interests of the lodge. I put the case before you as it has reached me." "Let me say, Mr. Chairman," said one of the older brethren, "that I have heard of Bertie Edwards, and that he has the name of being the best man in the Pinkerton service."
"Does anyone know him by sight?" asked McGinty.
"Yes," said McMurdo. "I do." There was a murmur of astonishment through the hall. "I believe we hold him in the hollow of our hands," he continued, with an exulting smile upon his face. "If we act quickly and wisely, we can cut this thing short. If I have your confidence and your help, it is little that we have to fear." "What have we to fear anyhow? What can he know of our affairs?" "You might say so if all were as stanch as you, Counselor. But this man has all the millions of the capitalists at his back. Do you think there is no weaker brother among all our lodges that could not be bought? He will get our secrets. Maybe he's got them already. There's only one sure cure. That he never leaves the valley," said Baldwin. McMurdo nodded. "Good for you, Brother Baldwin," he said. "You and I have had our differences, but you have said the true word tonight. Where is he, then? Where shall we know him?" "Eminent Bodymaster," said McMurdo earnestly, "I would put it to you that this is too vital a thing for us to discuss in open lodge. God forbid that I should throw a doubt on anyone here, but if so much as a word of gossip got to the ears of this man, there would be an end of any chance of our getting him. I would ask the lodge to choose a trustee committee, Mr. Chairman. Yourself, if I might suggest it, Brother Baldwin here, and 5 more. Then I can talk freely of what I know, and of what I advise should be done. The proposition was at once adopted and the committee chosen. Besides the chairman and Baldwin, there were the vulture-faced Secretary Harroway, Tiger Cormac, the brutal young assassin Carter, the treasurer, and the brothers Willoughby, fearless and desperate men who would stick at nothing. The usual revelry of the lodge was short and subdued, for there was a cloud upon the men's spirits, and many there for the first time began to see the cloud of avenging law drifting up in that serene sky under which they had dwelt so long. The horrors that they had dealt out to others had been so much part of their settled lives that the thought of retribution had become a remote one, and so seemed the more startling now that it came so closely upon them. They broke up early and left their leaders to their counsel. "Now, McMurdo," said McGinty when they were alone. The 7 men sat frozen in their seats. "I said just now that I knew Bertie Edwards," McMurdo explained. "I need not tell you that he is not here under that name. He's a brave man, but not a crazy one. He passes under the name of Steve Wilson, and he is lodging at Hobson's Patch. How do you know this?" "Because I fell into talk with him. I thought little of it at the time, nor would have given it a second thought but for this letter. But now I'm sure it's the man. I met him on the cars when I went down the line on Wednesday. A hard case if ever there was one. He said he was a reporter. I believed it for the moment. Wanted to know all he could about the Scowrers and what he called the outrages for a New York paper. Asked me every kind of question so as to get something. You bet I was giving nothing away. I'd pay for it, and pay well, said he, if I could get some stuff that would suit my editor. I said what I thought would please him best, and he handed me a $20 bill for my information. "There's 10 times that for you," said he, "if you can find me all that I want." "What did you tell him then?" "Any stuff I could make up." "How do you know he wasn't a newspaper man?" "I'll tell you. He got out at Hobson's Patch, so did I. I chanced into the Telegraph Bureau, and he was leaving it. "See here," said the operator after he'd gone out, "I guess we should charge double rates for this." "I guess you should," said I. He had filled the form with stuff that might have been Chinese, for all we could make of it. "He fires a sheet of this off every day," said the clerk. "Yes," said I. "It's special news for his paper, and he's scared that the others should tap it." That was what the operator thought, and what I thought at the time. But I think differently now. "By gar, I believe you are right," said McGinty. "But what do you allow that we should do about it?" "Why not go right down now and fix him?" someone suggested. "Aye, the sooner the better. I'd start this next minute if I knew where we could find him," said McMurdo. "He's in Hobson's Patch, but I don't know the house. I've got a plan, though, if you'll only take my advice." "Well, what is it?" "I'll go to the patch tomorrow morning. I'll find him through the operator. He can locate him, I guess. Well, then I'll tell him that I'm a freeman myself. I will offer him all the secrets of the lodge for a price. You bet he'll tumble to it. I'll tell him the papers are at my house, and that it's as much as my life would be worth to let him come while folk were about. He'll see that that's horse sense. Let him come at 10 o'clock at night, and he shall see everything. That will fetch him for sure. Well, you can plan the rest yourselves. Widow McNamara's is a lonely house. She's as true as steel and as deaf as a post. There's only Scanlon and me in the house. If I get his promise, and I'll let you know if I do, I'd have the whole 7 of you come to me by 9 o'clock. We'll get him. If ever he gets out alive, well, he can talk of Bertie Edwards's luck for the rest of his days. There's going to be a vacancy at Pinkerton's, or I'm mistaken. Leave it at that, McMurdo. At 9 tomorrow we'll be with you. You once get the door shut behind him, and you can leave the rest with us." Part 2. Chapter 7. The Trapping of Birdie Edwards. As McMurdo had said, the house in which he lived was a lonely one, and very well suited for such a crime as they had planned. It was on the extreme fringe of the town, and stood well back from the road. In any other case, the conspirators would have simply called out their man, as they had many a time before, and emptied their pistols into his body. But in this instant, it was very necessary to find out how much he knew, how he knew it, and what had been passed on to his employers. It was possible that they were already too late, and that the work had been done. If that was indeed so, they could at least have their revenge upon the man who had done it. But they were hopeful that nothing of great importance had yet come to the detective's knowledge, as otherwise, they argued, he would not have troubled to write down and forward such trivial information as McMurdo claimed to have given him. However, all this they would learn from his own lips. Once in their power, they would find a way to make him speak. It was not the first time they had handled an unwilling witness. McMurdo went to Hobson's Patch as agreed. The police seemed to take particular interest in him that morning, and Captain Marvin, he who had claimed the old acquaintance with him at Chicago, actually addressed him as he waited at the station. McMurdo turned away and refused to speak with him. He was back from his mission in the afternoon, and saw McGinty at the Union House. "He is coming," he said. "Good," said McGinty. The giant was in his shirt sleeves, with chains and seals gleaming athwart his ample waistcoat, and a diamond twinkling through the fringe of his bristling beard. Drink and politics had made the boss a very rich as well as powerful man. The more terrible, therefore, seemed that the glimpse of the prison or the gallows which had risen before him the night before. "Do you reckon he knows much?" he asked anxiously. McMurdo shook his head gloomily. "He's been here some time, 6 weeks at least. I guess he didn't come into these parts to look at the prospect. If he has been working among us all that time with the railroad money at his back, I should expect that he has got results, and that he has passed them on." "There's not a weak man in the lodge," cried McGinty. "True as steel every man of them, and yet by the Lord, there is that skunk Morris. What about him? If any man gives us away, it would be he. I've a mind to send a couple of the boys round before evening to give him a beating up and see what they can get from him." "Well, there would be no harm in that," McMurdo answered. "I won't deny that I have a liking for Morris, and would be sorry to see him come to harm. He has spoken to me once or twice over large matters, and though he may not see them the same as you or I, he never seemed the sort that squeals. But still, it is not for me to stand between him and you." "I'll fix the old devil," said McGinty with an oath. "I have had my eye on him this past year." "Well, you know best about that," McMurdo answered. "But whatever you do must be tomorrow, for we must lie low until the Pinkerton affair is settled up. We can't afford to set the police buzzing today of all days." "True for you," said McGinty, "and we'll learn from Birdie Edwards himself where he got his news if we have to cut his heart out first. Did he seem to scent a trap?" McMurdo laughed. "I guess I took him on his weak point," he said. "If he could get on the trail of the Scowrers, he's ready to follow it into hell. I took his money." McMurdo grinned as he produced a wad of dollar notes. "And as much more when he has seen all my papers." "What papers?" "Well, there are no papers. But I filled him up about constitutions and books of rules and forms of membership. He expects to get right down to the end of everything before he leaves." "Faith, he's right there," said McGinty grimly. "Didn't he ask you why you didn't bring him the papers?" "As if I would carry such things, and me a suspected man, and Captain Marvin, after speaking to me this very day at the depot." "Aye, I heard of that," said McGinty. "I guess the heavy end of this business is coming on to you. We could put him down an old shaft when we've done with him, but however we work it, we can't get past the man living at Hobson's Patch, and you being there today."
McMurdo shrugged his shoulders. "If we handle it right, they can never prove the killing," said he. "No one can see him come to the house after dark, and I'll lay to it that no one will see him go. Now see here, Counselor, I'll show you my plan, and I'll ask you to fit the others into it. You will all come in good time. Very well. He comes at 10. He is to tap 3 times, and me to open the door for him. Then I'll get behind him and shut it. He's our man."
"That's all easy and plain."
"Yes, but the next step wants considering. He's a hard proposition. He's heavily armed. I fooled him proper, and yet he is likely to be on his guard. Suppose I show him right into a room with 7 men in it, where he expected to find me alone. There is going to be shooting, and somebody is going to be hurt."
"That's so."
"And the noise is going to bring every damn copper in the township on top of it."
"I guess you're right."
"This is how I should work it. You will be in the big room, same as you saw when you had a chat with me. I'll open the door for him, show him into the parlor beside the door, and leave him there while I get the papers. That will give me the chance of telling you how things are shaping. Then I will go back to him with some faked papers. As he is reading them, I will jump for him and get my grip on his pistol arm. You'll hear me call, and in you will rush. The quicker the better, for he is as strong a man as I, and may have more than I can manage. But I allow that I can hold him till you come."
"It's a good plan," said McGinty. "The lodge will owe you a debt for this. I guess when I move out of the chair, I can put a name to the man that's coming after me."
"Sure, Counselor, I'm a little more than a recruit," said McMurdo, but his face showed what he thought of the great man's compliment. When he had returned home, he made his own preparations for the grim evening in front of him. First he cleaned, oiled, and loaded his Smith & Wesson revolver. Then he surveyed the room in which the detective was to be trapped. It was a large apartment, with a long deal table in the centre and the big stove at one side. At each of the other sides were windows. There were no shutters on these, only light curtains which drew across. McMurdo examined these attentively. No doubt it must have struck him that the apartment was very exposed for so secret a meeting. Yet its distance from the road made it of less consequence. Finally, he discussed the matter with his fellow lodger. Scanlon, though a Scowrer, was an inoffensive little man who was too weak to stand against the opinions of his comrades, but was secretly horrified by the deeds of blood at which he had sometimes been forced to assist. McMurdo told him shortly what was intended.
"And if I were you, Mike Scanlon, I would take a night off and keep clear of it. There will be bloody work here before morning."
"Well, indeed then, Mac," Scanlon answered. "It's not the will but the nerve that is wanting in me. When I saw Manager Dunn go down at the colliery yonder, it was just more than I could stand. I'm not made for it, same as you are, McGinty. If the lodge will think none the worse of me, I'll just do as you advise and leave you to yourselves for the evening."
The men came in good time as arranged. They were outwardly respectable citizens, well clad and cleanly, but a judge of faces would have read little hope for Bertie Edwards in those hard mouths and remorseless eyes. There was not a man in the room whose hands had not been reddened a dozen times before. They were as hardened to human murder as a butcher to sheep. Foremost, of course, both in appearance and in guilt, was the formidable boss. Harroway, the secretary, was a lean, bitter man, with a long, scraggy neck and nervous, jerky limbs, a man of incorruptible fidelity where the finances of the order were concerned, and with no notion of justice or honesty to anyone beyond.
The Treasurer Carter was a middle-aged man with an impassive, rather sulky expression and a yellow parchment skin. He was a capable organizer, and the actual details of nearly every outrage had sprung from his plotting brain. The two Willoughbys were men of action, tall, lithy young fellows with determined faces, while their companion, Tiger Cormac, a heavy, dark youth, was feared even by his own comrades for the ferocity of his disposition. These were the men who assembled that night under the roof of McMurdo for the killing of the Pinkerton detective. Their host had placed whisky upon the table, and they had hastened to prime themselves for the work before them. Baldwin and Cormac were already half drunk, and the liquor had brought out all their ferocity. Cormac placed his hands on the stove for an instant. It had been lighted, for the nights were still cold. "That will do," said he with an oath. "Aye," said Baldwin, catching his meaning. "If he is strapped to that, we will have the truth out of him." "We'll have the truth out of him, never fear," said McMurdo. He had nerves of steel, this man, for though the whole weight of the affair was on him, his manner was as cool and unconcerned as ever. The others marked it and applauded. "You are the one to handle him," said the boss approvingly. "Not a warning will he get till your hand is on his throat. It's a pity there are no shutters to your windows." McMurdo went from one to the other and drew the curtains tighter. "Sure no one can spy on us now. It's close upon the hour." "Maybe he won't come. Maybe he'll get a sniff of danger," said the secretary. "He'll come, never fear," McMurdo answered. "He is as eager to come as you can be to see him." "Hark to that!" They all sat like wax figures, some of them their glasses arrested halfway to their lips. 3 loud knocks had sounded at the door. "Hush!" McMurdo raised his hand in caution. An exulting glance went round the circle, and hands were laid upon their weapons. "Not a sound, for your lives," McMurdo whispered, as he went from the room, closing the door carefully behind him. With strained ears the murderers waited. They counted the steps of their comrade down the passage. Then they heard him open the outer door. There were a few words as of greeting. Then they were aware of a strange step inside and of an unfamiliar voice. An instant later came the slam of the door and the turning of the key in the lock. Their prey was safe within the trap. Tiger Cormac laughed horribly, and Boss McGinty clapped his great hand across his mouth. "Be quiet, you fool," he whispered. "You'll be the undoing of us yet." There was a mutter of conversation from the next room. It seemed interminable. Then the door opened, and McMurdo appeared, his finger upon his lip. He came to the end of the table and looked round at them. A subtle change had come over him. His manner was of one who has great work to do. His face had set into granite firmness. His eyes shone with a fierce excitement behind his spectacles. He had become a visible leader of men. They stared at him with eager interest, but he said nothing. Still with the same singular gaze he looked from man to man. "Well," cried Boss McGinty at last, "is he here? Is Bertie Edwards here?" "Yes," McMurdo answered slowly. "Bertie Edwards is here. I'm Bertie Edwards." There were 10 seconds after that brief speech, during which the room might have been empty, so profound was the silence. The hissing of a kettle upon the stove rose sharp and strident to the ear. 7 white faces, all turned upward to this man who dominated them, were set motionless with utter terror. Then, with a sudden shivering of glass, a bristle of glistening rifle barrels broke through each window while the curtains were torn from their hangings. At the sight, Boss McGinty gave the roar of a wounded bear and plunged for the half-opened door. A levelled revolver met him there with the stern blue eyes of Captain Marvin of the Mine Police gleaming behind the sights. The boss recoiled and fell back into his chair. "You're safer there, Counselor," said the man whom they had known as McMurdo. "And you, Baldwin, if you don't take your hand off your pistol, you'll cheat the hangman yet. Pull it out, or by the Lord that made me— There, that will do. There are 40 armed men around this house, and you can figure it out for yourselves what chance you have. Take their pistols, Marvin." There was no possible resistance under the menace of those rifles. The men were disarmed. Sulky, sheepish, and amazed, they still sat round the table. "I'd like to say a word to you before we separate," said the man who had trapped them. "I guess we may not meet again until you see me on the stand in the courthouse. I'll give you something to think over between now and then. You know me for what I am. At last I can put my cards on the table. I am Bertie Edwards of Pinkerton's. I was chosen to break up your gang. I had a hard and dangerous game to play. Not a soul, not one soul, not my nearest and dearest, knew that I was playing it. Only Captain Marvin here and my employers knew that. But it's over tonight, thank God, and I am the winner." The 7 pale, rigid faces looked up at him. There was unappeasable hatred in their eyes. He read the relentless threat. "Maybe you think that the game is not over yet. Well, I'll take my chance of that. Anyhow, some of you will take no further hand, and there are 60 more besides yourself that will see a jail this night. I'll tell you this, that when I was put upon this job I never believed there was such a society as yours. I thought it was paper talk, and that I would prove it so. They told me it was to do with the freemen, so I went to Chicago and was made one. Then I was surer than ever that it was just paper talk. For I found no harm in the society, but a deal of good. Still, I had to carry out my job, and came to the coal valleys. When I reached this place, I learned that I was wrong, and that it wasn't a dime novel after all. So I stayed to look after it. I never killed a man in Chicago. I never minted $1 in my life. Those I gave you were as good as any others. But I never spent money better. I knew the way into your good wishes, and so pretended to you that the law was after me. It all worked just as I thought. So I joined your infernal lodge, and I took my share in your councils. Maybe they will say that I was as bad as you. They can say what they like, so long as I get you. But what is the truth? The night I joined, you beat up old man Stanger. I could not warn him, for there was no time. But I held your hand, Baldwin, when you would have killed him. If ever I have suggested things so as to keep my place among you, they were things which I knew I could prevent. I could not save Dunn and Menzies, for I did not know enough. But I will see that their murderers are hanged. I gave Chester Wilcox warning, so that when I blew his house in, he and his folk were in hiding. There was many a crime that I could not stop, but if you look back and think how often your man came home the other road, or was down in town when you went for him, or stayed indoors when you thought he would come out, you'll see my work." "You blasted traitor!" hissed McGinty through closed teeth. "Aye, John McGinty, you may call me that if it eases your smart. You and your like have been the enemy of God and man in these parts. It took a man to get between you and the poor devils of men and women that you held under your grip. There was just one way of doing it, and I did it. You call me a traitor, but I guess there's many 1,000 will call me a deliverer that went down into hell to save them. I've had 3 months of it. I wouldn't have 3 such months again if they let me loose in the treasury at Washington for it. I had to stay till I had it all, every man and every secret right here in this hand. I'd have waited a little longer if it hadn't come to my knowledge that my secret was coming out. A letter had come into the town that would have set you wise to it all. Then I had to act, and act quickly. I have nothing more to say to you, except that when my time comes, I'll die the easier when I think of the work I have done in this valley. Now, Marvin, I'll keep you no more. Take them in and get it over."
There is little more to tell. Scanlon had been given a sealed note to be left at the address of Miss Etty Shafter, a mission which he had accepted with a wink and a knowing smile. In the early hours of the morning, a beautiful woman and a much-muffled man boarded a special train, which had been sent by the railroad company, and made a swift, unbroken journey out of the land of danger. It was the last time that ever either Etty or her lover set foot in the Valley of Fear. 10 days later, they were married in Chicago, with old Jacob Shafter as witness of the wedding. The trial of the Scowrers was held far from the place where their adherents might have terrified the guardians of the law. In vain they struggled. In vain the money of the lodge, money seized by blackmail out of the whole countryside, was spent like water in the attempt to save them. That cold, clear, unimpassioned statement from one who knew every detail of their lives, their organization, and their crimes, was unshaken by all the wiles of their defenders. At last, after so many years, they were broken and scattered. The cloud was lifted forever from the valley. McGinty met his fate upon the scaffold, cringing and whining when the last hour came. 8 of his chief followers shared his fate. 50-odd had various degrees of imprisonment. The work of Birdie Edwards was complete. And yet, as he had guessed, the game was not over yet. There was another hand to be played, and yet another and another. Ted Baldwin, for one, had escaped the scaffold, so had the Willoughbys, so had several others of the fiercest spirits of the gang. For 10 years they were out of the world, and then came a day when they were free once more, a day which Edwards, who knew his men, was very sure would be an end of his life of peace. They had sworn an oath on all that they had thought holy to have his blood as a vengeance for their comrades, and well they strove to keep their vow. From Chicago he was chased, after 2 attempts, so near success that it was sure that the third would get him. From Chicago he went under a changed name to California, and it was there that the light went for a time out of his life, when Etty Edwards died. Once again he was nearly killed, and once again under the name of Douglas he worked in a lonely canyon, where with an English partner named Barker he amassed a fortune. At last there came a warning to him that the bloodhounds were on his track once more, and he cleared only just in time for England. And thence came the John Douglas, who for a second time married a worthy mate, and lived for 5 years as a Sussex county gentleman, a life which ended with the strange happenings of which we have heard. Epilogue. The police trial had passed, in which the case of John Douglas was referred to a higher court. So had the quarter sessions, at which he was acquitted as having acted in self-defence. "Get him out of England at any cost," wrote Holmes to the wife. "There are forces here which may be more dangerous than those he has escaped. There is no safety for your husband in England." 2 months had gone by, and the case had to some extent passed from our minds. Then one morning there came an enigmatic note slipped into our letterbox. "Dear Mr. Holmes, dear me," said the singular epistle. There was neither superscription nor signature. I laughed at the quaint message, but Holmes showed unwonted seriousness. "Deviltry, Watson," he remarked, and sat long with a clouded brow. Late last night, Mrs. Hudson, our landlady, brought up a message that a gentleman wished to see Mr. Holmes. and that the matter was of the utmost importance. Close at the heels of his messenger came Cecil Barker, our friend of the moated manor house. His face was drawn and haggard.
"I've had bad news, terrible news, Mr. Holmes," said he.
"I feared as much," said Holmes.
"You have not had a cable, have you?"
"I have had a note from someone who has."
"It's poor Douglas. They tell me his name is Edwards. But he will always be Jack Douglas of Benito Canyon to me. I told you that they started together for South Africa in the Palmyra 3 weeks ago."
"Exactly."
"The ship reached Cape Town last night. I received this cable from Mrs. Douglas this morning.
Jack has been lost overboard in gale off St. Helena. No one knows how accident occurred. Ivy Douglas."
"Ha!
"It came like that, did it?" said Holmes thoughtfully.
Well,
"I've no doubt it was well stage managed."
"You mean that you think there was no accident?"
"None in the world."
"He was murdered?"
"Surely."
"So I think also. These infernal Scowrers, this cursed vindictive nest of criminals."
No, my good sir," said Holmes. "There is a master hand here. It is no case of sawed-off shotguns and clumsy six-shooters. You can tell an old master by the sweep of his brush. I can tell a Moriarty when I see one. This crime is from London, not from America. But for what motive? Because it is done by a man who cannot afford to fail. One whose whole unique position depends upon the fact that all he does must succeed. A great brain and a huge organization have been turned to the extinction of one man. It is crushing the nut with the trip hammer, an absurd extravagance of energy, but the nut is very effectually crushed all the same. How came this man to have anything to do with it? I can only say that the first word that ever came to us of the business was from one of his lieutenants. I can only say that the first word that ever came to us from the business was from one of his lieutenants. These Americans were well advised. Having an English job to do, they took into partnership, as any foreign criminal could do, this great consultant in crime. From that moment their man was doomed. At first he would content himself by using his machinery in order to find their victim. Then he would indicate how the matter might be treated. Finally, when he read in the reports of the failure of this agent, he would step in himself, with a master touch. You heard me warn this man at Burstow Manor House that the coming danger was greater than the past. Was I right? Barker beat his head with his clenched fist in his impotent anger.
"Do not tell me that we have to sit down under this. Do you say that no one can ever get level with this king devil?"
"No, I don't say that," said Holmes, and his eyes seemed to be looking far into the future. "I don't say that he can't be beat, but you must give me time. You must give me time." We all sat in silence for some minutes, while those fateful eyes still strained to pierce the veil. The End.